You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Common Descent, a podcast about paleontology, evolution, the history of life on Earth, and sometimes plants. This is episode 215. It's one of those plants episodes. This episode's topic is ferns. We will spend this episode's main discussion talking about ferns, the plants that are ferns, the plants that are near ferns. Ferns today, they're extinct relatives, which are abundant, and there's a whole bunch of different things that go under the ferns umbrella. Ferns are very strange and confusing. Fortunately, we know a person who's better at this than we are.
Yep.
So as with all of our 5-episode plant topic episodes, we will be joined for the discussion by our friendly neighborhood paleobotanist, Dr. Allie Baumgartner, who's going to inform us what ferns are.
Yeah. Very, very eager to learn, because I know ferns are weird, and that's about the extent of my knowledge.
And they're so prevalent in paleontology discussions, and there's lots of fossil ferns, so this is going to be, there's a lot of relevance to it. On top of that, it was requested. Requests for ferns and fern cousins were made by Luke, Andrea, Lydia, Wayne, Morg, Jesse, Mad Jack, Jackie, Saturn Starcat, Tony, Teoranosaurus, Cinder, Evan, Garrick, Malmo, Lauren, Hannah, Mari, Roan, Emmett, Sonorat's Shrew, Derek, Gorberg, Taterboy, Pretty Red Gem, and Atopodentatus.
That's a bunch of fern friends.
People want to hear about ferns.
Well requested, everyone.
Well, stay tuned, because we're going to talk a whole lot about ferns with Allie. Before we get to that, some quick announcements. Number one, we have a Patreon.
Yep.
The support that we receive on Patreon allows us to do all of the things we do for the podcast, the equipment and the paying us and all the stuff that we need to do. Patrons get in return all sorts of goodies like live streams with us and director's notes and bonus content. And at certain levels, new patrons get their names shouted out on the podcast. This episode, we would love to welcome to the podcast Bethany, Beckett, Cynthia, and Katsetera.
Welcome. Thank you for joining the Patreon and supporting us.
Welcome. Thank you. We greatly appreciate it. Dear listeners, if you'd like to support our SciComm efforts, find the link to the Patreon down in the episode description. Also going on here at Common Descent these days, Silver Screen Science.
Yeah.
This April, we are releasing 3 episodes of Silver Screen Science where we are analyzing the science of Planet of the Apes in 3 different forms.
Yep. And 2 down.
2 down as of this release. 2 episodes down. 1 more to go. And then on April 26th, Silver Screen Science live stream open to anyone who wants to join us. Find the details on our website.
Come talk movies with us.
Come talk movies with us. And speaking of podcast projects, a reminder, since this is a plants episode, that our new series, Leave It to Us, is in production and should be coming out in the not-too-distant future.
Yes.
Also, we got mail.
We did. We got mail from Jess or Lagerstatten. They're hanging out on the Discord if you want to come hang out with all of us. They sent us some postcards from Emerald City Comic-Con.
Very cool. We love a con.
Some stickers, some of their stickers, some Sleepy Dimetrodons. So great stuff. That's on my laptop, and the happy croc is up on my wall.
Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Yes.
And finally, these days, we like to shout out organizations that are out there that are doing good stuff. This episode, we want to give a shout out in particular to Assigned Media, which is a website dedicated to trans news and trans issues and anti-trans propaganda. You can find them online. That's Assigned Media. Check it out. And with that, let's move on to the news. Every episode, we like to cover some of the things that are new in the world of paleontology to keep us all up to date. The first thing that's new is that the incredible Riley Black has published a new book about the ancient history of plants called When the Earth Was Green. Very fitting for this episode. We take you now to our discussion with Riley Black. Hello, Riley.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being here. We're very excited to have you on the podcast. We were just joking that your name has come up on the podcast a bunch because you write a bunch of news articles that we share. It is thrilling to have you on here to talk about some of the things that one of the things in particular that you've written.
Yeah.
It's so many things. I mean, I've been doing this for like at least 15 years or so professionally, so it's a tall pile to get into.
So before we get to your new book, if you would please introduce yourself for any of our audience who don't know you.
Sure, I'll give you the compressed version. So I'm Riley Black. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the author of the award-winning, and now I can say best-selling books, The Last Days of the Dinosaurs and When the Earth Was Green, as well as a whole bunch of others. I regularly write for National Geographic, Smithsonian, Slate, like you name a place as a science section, I've probably written for them. I've worked as a science advisor on the Jurassic World franchise. I'm frequently on Science Friday and Nova. The Last Days of the Dinosaurs got name-dropped on Jeopardy last year, and I'm not doing all that stuff. I'm out in the desert usually helping museum crews look for new fossil sites.
Cool.
Yeah. Listeners, if you haven't read anything that Riley has done, obviously the point of this segment is to advertise this new book. But anytime you see, people will sometimes ask, how do I know what like news sources are reputable? And one of my pieces of advice is learn the names that you can trust.
Mm-hmm.
If you see Riley's name in the byline, that's a piece you can trust.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I do my best to. I've been trying to cover a bit more stuff, and especially when I write about, what the topic of this book is about plants or invertebrates or things like that. When I get a little bit far from the vertebrates of the past 250 million years, it gets a little bit tricky sometimes. But I like to think that I always give it my best.
So today we've brought you on because you published a brand new book that is a plants-centric book, which we thought was very fitting for this is a plant-centric episode. When the Earth Was Green. If our listeners decide to pick this book up, what can they expect? Give us the elevator pitch.
When the Earth Was Green is kind of like a series of 15 nature walks through prehistory. In that if you were there in the ancient past, when the first plants were starting to grow at microscopic size, in the shallows over 1 billion years ago, or the famous coal swamps of the Carboniferous, or the fern-covered floodplains of the Morrison Formation way back when Allosaurus and Stegosaurus were stomping around, what would you see and what kind of interactions would you witness unfold? It's really about how biodiversity creates itself through interactions with a focus on plants and animals. It's kind of challenging, at the beginning of writing this book, thinking like, how do I make plants which don't move a whole lot exciting?
Mm-hmm,
but I thought, well, if we focus on the relationships, how they shaped our planet, not just the oxygen in the atmosphere, but the fact that an apatosaurus is shaped like that because it's going to try and eat as many plants as quickly as possible to grow very quickly, and plants kind of explain why this dinosaur is this fantastic shape. That's the kind of subject matter in this book, that it's trying to put you there in the ancient past to get you to look at relationships and interactions. They're still going on all around us today. So that's really the point of the whole exercise, is to get people to stop and smell the roses, maybe a little bit literally, to look around at all this wonderful life around us now that's been evolving alongside of us, formed our own bodies in many ways, and just being fascinated by and honoring those relationships that have been around, since before, our ancestors kind of crawled their way out onto land.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting challenge, right? Making plants exciting because they're so often overlooked. And especially in this case where it's through storytelling, right? Mm-hmm. It's through these vignettes, these little short stories in each chapter that sort of, to me, I don't know how intentional this is on your part, but sort of harkens to things like Walking with Dinosaurs, or that style of documentary where it's, here's a little scene from the distant past. And telling those little stories about plants is a really interesting challenge for a storyteller because, like you said, plants are not typically very active. They're not typically very dynamic in the ways that we tend to tell those stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Walking with Dinosaurs and books like, not just Raptor Red, which comes up all the time, but things like Edwin Colbert wrote a book called The Year of Dinosaur way back when, about an apatosaurus and just like a year in the life of this apatosaurus. And this kind of narrative approach is like a very long tradition in paleontology. So this is kind of my version picking it up. And I specifically wanted to do it in a way that was very aware of the language that we often use in paleo, the kind of tropes and stuff that are often brought to these things, that we often talk about, the dominance of certain organisms, whether it's dinosaurs or even plants, colonizing or invading the land, things like that. All this very much, life is kind of taking over something else. And it's all, combat, nature red in tooth and claw. And this was my attempt to look more at, well, what about cooperation? What about mutual benefit? What about these other stories that maybe are not as dramatic as we might see in some traditional stories or programs, but are still very much important? And as I went along, it just got more and more fascinating. I think I started with the outlines for 10 chapters. And I kept finding stuff that I have to include this. Like I wrote a story about, a tooth that was found in South America belonging to a very early form of primate called an eosimiid. And this was the third type of primate that was found in prehistoric South America, and indicates that basically monkeys and other primates rafted across the ancient Atlantic multiple times, at least 3 times, probably more, just entirely accidentally. They were living on the coast of ancient Africa. These coastal storms would rip up all this vegetation, send it across the ocean, and it wasn't just once, but over and over again this happened. So what must that have been like for these little creatures, especially in these ancient seas? And what a stroke of luck, both good and bad, that resulted in this phenomenon that we see today. And when I kept bumping into stories like that, it's like, well, we wouldn't have this without plants. And even that specific case thing about how often we talk about like splendid isolation, when South America was an island continent, or the Galapagos or what have you, that if you have an island of any kind, that like life kind of does weird things there because it's entirely isolated. And it's like, well, that's not exactly as true as we might think, that there are connections. You're not going to have like a big cat swimming across the ancient Atlantic, but there are other ways to get there that form the biodiversity that we see. And the more that I found these just almost just very unexpected or even everyday interactions, it just felt wonderful. And a lot of it came even from questions from friends. I had a friend who asked me, like, when did autumn start in the prehistoric past? And it's like, I don't know. That's a great question. Thankfully, there was a paper about this from basically Pliocene Germany about fossil leaves that appear to have colors from autumn senescence. And granted, it's probably much, much older than that. But that was the sort of thing that drove this book, was that the more that I got into this, these questions that you just don't think to ask, and then all of a sudden it's like it opens up this whole window on prehistory that's fundamentally different than if we were just looking at the charismatic megafauna.
Yeah.
And I really like, the book has a tagline, "Evolution's Greatest Romance," and I like that you're focusing on the connection between plants and animals, that because so often they're like almost purposely talked about separately. Or like if there's something that tries to focus on plants, it's just focusing on plants. But they are, you can't disentangle them from one another. The relationship is so connected and they affect each other so heavily that you have to tell both stories to tell the whole story.
Entirely.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, the Apatosaurus is shaped that way because of the plants. There's a chapter in the book where a certain very large snake makes an appearance that I was very happy about. And I really liked that you made the point that this animal functions the way it does because of plants. That the plant, even though this isn't a plant eater, the way that plants exist in its ecosystem affect the way that it has to live its life, which is a really great demonstration of that connection.
That Paleocene chapter was one of my favorites to write. I really grew out of the last days of the dinosaurs because I touch on it a bit. The concluding chapter of that book takes place in about 1 million years after impact in these early Paleocene forests, and I got to jump ahead a little bit. So the stuff that's based out of the fossil formations in Colombia, where that giant snake and others are found, but it was found in a big coal mine with lots and lots of fossil plants, and it really struck me how much those first rainforests could not have existed, so far as we know, during much of the Mesozoic or in many of these dinosaur habitats. We have this image, I certainly have had it, ever since I saw Fantasia as a kid, that, these steaming dense jungles with dinosaurs kind of crashing through them. And Jurassic Park has certainly, done its bit to perpetuate that idea, and plenty of other media and pop culture, but their environments were so different. And that the habitat that led to so many of our own adaptations and traits could have only have existed after that impact, in that you not only didn't have big animals like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus, knocking trees over and trampling things and leaving dinosaur-sized holes in the forest, so plants grow closer together, but the asteroid impact itself injected a lot of iron and other minerals into soils all around the planet, allowed plants to grow in different ways. Angiosperms became, much more common, and in these dense forests, our little shrew-like primate ancestors are running around eventually, in a place that binocular vision, depth perception becomes important. It's part of the reason that our eyes face forward and that we have grasping hands, and there's a sort of coda to this chapter much, much later about Ardipithecus, about 4.4 million years ago, earliest humans still living in trees, and how the flexibility in our wrists and our shoulders and our arms and our upper body really comes from the arboreal lifestyle of our ancestors. And just kind of these whispers where even if the relationship doesn't exist down the line, plants have still left their mark on all these different organisms, including our own ancestry, and allowed evolution to unfold in certain paths that they wouldn't have taken otherwise. How powerful all this background stuff is. And like was just said a moment ago, like this is really just about relationships. It's a plant book, but there are plenty of critters in it as well. And given my background as an ecologist, that's mostly what I studied when I was in university. Even though I didn't graduate, it still took a ton of ecology courses. That's what always fascinated me, is just not look at any living thing entirely in isolation, but what are all its connections? Every organism is kind of an ecosystem unto itself and part of other ecosystems. When you start thinking about it that way,
it's ecosystems all the way down.
Yes, you can pull at any thread and get to all these amazing big or small picture kind of things.
Yeah. Now, speaking of pictures, one thing that we do want to make sure to mention is that there is art in this book.
Yeah.
Each chapter has, at the very least, sort of title art, and then there's other art sort of sprinkled throughout. I do have a favorite art piece in here that I'm going to bring up so that I can show it to Will. But who did the art, and what was the process of getting the art in here?
So the artist, much like Last Days of the Dinosaurs, her name's Corey Bing. Fantastic artist. I had actually met her at a furry convention years ago, and she was selling zines and making enamel pins and stuff about like homology and about convergent evolution, stuff like that. And I always remembered that. And when I got to writing The Last Days of the Dinosaurs, I wanted to have original illustrations. And I remembered Corey, and I thought, like, I want to give this opportunity to somebody who hasn't had a chance to illustrate a book before, like somebody who can grow their portfolio maybe a little bit. And she was just such a joy to work with that, we decided to do it again for When the Earth Was Green. I'm actually going to work with her again for the following book. The working title is Tyrant Lizard Queen, a narrative biography of a dinosaur. I don't know if you've heard of them. T-Rex, I guess, very, very obscure
I think
species.
They came out in the news maybe once or twice.
Yeah. Anyways, it saw something about it. But Corey's been fantastic, and whether it's close-ups of plants or entire organisms, she's done an amazing job. And I love just like how fun and whimsical many of them are. Like when I proposed that image of Titanoboa just peeking out from under a lily pad, or a saber cat rolling in catnip. All these moments, whether they're soft and sensitive or they're meant to be a little bit silly, Corey just nails it every single time. And my edits for her art were very, very small. And I admire that, like in some cases, she was harder on herself, I think, with the critiques than I was. There's a particular illustration of Yehornis that I think went through like 2 or 3 iterations just to make sure that the teeth and feathers and everything were correct. So Corey did an amazing job. And if you get the audiobook, because the audiobook narrated by Ren Mack just sounds fantastic. Corey does sell zines, basically, of all the art in the book through her website. So if you get the audiobook and you find yourself missing the illustrations, you can still get them through Corey's store.
That's excellent. I love the Titanoboa image.
Yeah.
Just the little, that little cutie poking out from the water. And the one I was referring to as my favorite is there is an image of a saber-toothed cat just having a field day and some catnip.
Yeah.
And it's so cute.
I mean, very much inspired. Anyone who follows me on social media knows how much I love the little fuzzballs in my house. So watching Strata and Joey in particular, 2 of my cats, roll around in catnip really got me thinking about, like, well, wait, like catnip's a plant. How old does it go back? And I was really surprised to learn that it evolved its active properties, at least twice, and it's incredibly ancient. And even though there's not direct evidence that saber cats were doing this, there's also no reason to think that they weren't. I spell all of this out in the appendix. I try and be very transparent about what is speculation, what is based on technical knowledge, what things do we know like must have transpired, even though we don't have the direct evidence for it yet. But just it felt so important to explain that plants aren't just food, and they don't just oxygenate the atmosphere, sink carbon, all this other stuff. Like, they contain compounds that do fun stuff, as we well know, like every time we make a cup of coffee or tea or something like that in the morning. And that certainly extends to our kitty friends too.
Yeah, well, and it's I like when stuff like that isn't included, because it's, even if we don't have direct evidence and maybe they were different enough that they weren't reacting, but we still should, when we look at animals today interacting with ecosystems in some interesting way, ask the question, would that also translate to these extinct animals?
Yeah.
Because for many of those behaviors, there's no reason it couldn't have been. It's just we can't necessarily confirm it, but it's still an important question to ask. And I like when those things are included for people.
And I like that it has an aspect of something we've talked about with paleo art, right? Other different methods of depicting ancient life is taking the opportunity to depict ancient life in mundane ways.
Yes.
Or even silly ways, because animals are extremely boring a lot of the time, and they're extremely silly a bunch of the time.
So goofy.
And, so much when we look at dinosaurs and saber-toothed cats, it's so focused on hunting and fighting and all the Hollywood exciting stuff. But the image of just a pair of saber-toothed cats playing around with each other and laying down in the grass next to each other, that's probably what they spent most of their time doing.
Yeah, carnivores need a lot of sleep, so it felt like that's capturing more of the experience than if it was all about hunting. And that was a lot of my hope for this book, was to find those just moments and give people that sense of empathy of like, what would it be like, not just to be there, but the experiences that these organisms had, as much as we can reconstruct them without anthropomorphizing or doing that too much. I tried to be very careful about it, but so much is shared, and especially now, just given how stressful everything constantly is, it's been really gratifying to hear readers say it's a good break, to think about the past and what life was like. Put your brain somewhere else a little bit. That's kind of what it's like writing it. I am both autistic and I have CPTSD. Flashbacks are very familiar to me, and as is focus. And sometimes when I'm writing, it feels almost flashback-esque in a positive way, where it's kind of, it feels like, okay, if I'm standing in this environment, what would I see? What would I feel? What's the temperature? Do I smell anything? And to be able to translate and kind of offer that to folks, to like engage their senses just through words on the page or through the audiobook has really been gratifying.
Yeah. Riley, the book is wonderful. It's extremely fun to read and listen to. I have now done both. A bit of both. I didn't go through the whole thing twice. I will be fully transparent. And it's the scenes are lovely. It's a beautiful experience. Listeners, you should go get a hold of this book. Riley, where can people find When the Earth Was Green?
You can find it from any bookseller or just about any library that you'd like to ask for it from. I usually recommend bookshop.org for the physical or ebook copy, or libro.fm for the audiobook, because those also benefit your local indie bookstores. Excellent.
And if people want to see more of you, where can they find you and your million other things that you do?
Yes, I bop around a little bit to talks, and I still have some coming up this year, so I'll try and post about those on social. You can find my website at rileyblack.net. That's where I put a lot of the major stuff. But for the most up-to-date things, articles that I'm working on, things like that, restingdinoface.bluesky.social is my main social media account these days.
Fantastic. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about the book or anything before we officially let you go?
I just hope that if you pick it up that you enjoy it. It's the second of what I hope is going to be an ongoing series of these narrative type books. I'm already signed on with St. Martin's for the next one, so we're hoping to have Tyrant Lizard Queen out, probably early 2027.
All right.
But if you want to try something different, if you've listened to or read a ton of books, sort of taking in the science of prehistory and the history of the discipline in paleontology, and you just want to spend time with the organisms, in the deep past. I think you'll very much like it, and it's just been wonderful getting to enthuse about it with you both.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. Once again, dear listeners, we cannot say enough wonderful, lovely things about Riley. Go find her online, get a hold of this book, and enjoy it. I think that it's fantastic. Highly recommended. Big recommend. Riley, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope it's not too long before I'm back.
Yes.
We will figure it out.
Absolutely.
Bye for now.
See you next time.
And we're back. Will, what do you got for us in terms of news?
My news is about a fossil wasp that seems to have a grabby butt.
Oh,
Yeah.
grabby butt wasp.
Yes, famously known. This is research by Chong Wu et al. In BEMC Biology, and the article is by Jess Cockerell in Science Alert. So, this is describing some fossilized wasps in amber. This is Myanmar amber, and as we always like to remind, Myanmar amber is tied up in some questionable political situations and practices. But this is mid-Cretaceous, 99 million years old, and this is describing 16 adult female wasps preserved in this amber that have an interesting trait. These are a new species, Sireniobacillus charybdis. Evidently, like, most of them are just normal wasp. Like, their body is pretty normal wasp all over, but the end of their abdomen, so the tip of their back end, has these paddle-like flaps on there where the ovipositor is, where they would be laying eggs and stuff. There are 3 flaps coming from slightly different structures, but they form these paddle-like structures that meet up at the end, and the lower flap is preserved at different positions on different individuals.
Oh, so it was mobile.
So it's showing that it could move, which is what led the researchers to think that it might be a grasping structure somehow.
Huh.
Yeah.
Got butt hands.
Yes. This is super interesting because that's neat, but also nothing like this is known from any other insect.
Yeah.
This is a...
Which is saying something.
Yes, exactly.
Insects have done a lot of stuff.
Like, there are other insects with grabby parts, like earwigs have grabby parts on their rear end, but not this kind of structure.
Those are their cerci,
Yeah.
I believe, which is a common structure on the back end of a lot of insects.
So this is a unique structure as far as we currently know. You know, there might be some a person out there who goes, no, wait, this one.
I have a wasp like this.
But as far as we can tell, this is a unique structure to these wasps. And that they said the rounded, like, paddles have setae, the bug hairs, along the edges. And that those together kind of make them look like a Venus flytrap.
I saw that comparison made online.
Yeah. So they've got these, like, a Venus fly butt.
Huh.
Yep. A Venus wasp butt.
For trapping what?
Yeah, right?
What are you grabbing?
There are a few things this could be used for. It could be mating.
Sure.
So grabbing onto a mate or something. We do see that in lots of organisms where there is a grasping structure specifically for mating.
Yep.
They do make the point, though, that is not known. It is very rare for the female to be the one grabbing the male.
Yeah.
So unless the males, which are not preserved here, also have the structure, then it doesn't seem likely that this is a female mating structure. It could be for catching prey, since these are predatory wasps, so
Sure.
they might be catching prey that way. They don't think that's particularly likely based on the other features of the wasp. They think that these wasps were likely parasitoids, and they were using this grasper to grab the insects that they're going to lay their egg on or in and immobilize them temporarily to be able to plant their larva, and then the larva eat that host.
Oh. So does the grabby butt part not interfere with the position of the ovipositor?
It sounds like it is kind of surrounding the ovipositor.
Interesting.
So if they grab it, the ovipositor would be positioned
I see.
near or on the host.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, creepy.
Yes. This is very interesting because we don't see this in parasitoid wasps today. As we already mentioned, we don't see this in any insects. So if it is that these are parasitoids, it would mean that Cretaceous parasitoid wasps were employing a wider variety of prey capture and parasitoid behaviors than our modern diversity, which, to remind you from the parasites episode, is ridiculous.
Yes, episode 102. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Get used to them.
Yep. And parasitoid wasps are some of the most diverse insects.
Yes.
There's almost one for every kind of insect you can think of.
Interesting. Well, if it's a ovipositor egg-laying related feature, then it would make sense that it is just a female wasp feature.
Yes.
Since they're the ones who are going to be laying eggs.
Exactly. They specifically group them within some parasitoid wasps called the coinobiont wasps, which are known parasitoids today, that they typically go after slow-moving hosts, like caterpillars, larvae, things that can't run away. This grabbing could maybe mean that they were going after faster-moving hosts and needed to restrain them, because you don't need to restrain a caterpillar because it's not going to flee from you. There are wasps that go after faster-moving hosts. The Dryaenid family capture their hosts with their forelegs. Okay. And they go after things like leaf hoppers and tree hoppers and plant hoppers, which are famously very quick and fast-moving insects. But they are also known to actively track down their prey beforehand and kind of hunt them down, which it doesn't seem like this group was likely doing based off their other anatomical features. I don't know what features that would be of a wasp that tells you whether it's a chaser or not, but it doesn't seem like it fits to that behavior. So they think what their grabby butt might be for is, like a Venus flytrap, a trap. That those setae might be trigger hairs, and it's more of a sit and wait for the host to come in range and then lunge and grab instead of pursuing the host.
An ambush parasite.
Yeah.
Huh.
So it might be waiting for faster moving things like a hopper or a fly, something like that, but it's using this trap jaw butt to catch the host long enough to get an egg on them.
We will be remembering this when spooky season comes along.
Yep. Now, as mentioned, there are no males in this
Yep, I was going to say, it'd be very interesting to see what the males look like.
So, seeing whether or not they have this structure will be very informative to actually determining what this structure likely is. If we do find a male of this species, and it doesn't have this structure, it would heavily indicate that this is likely something for egg laying somehow with the female. If the males do have it, that might suggest that it is something mating or hunting related.
Yeah.
It might lean it away from the host capture.
Yeah. The males have a bigger one.
Yes, exactly. They've got two of them.
They're catching dinosaurs.
Just hang off your ear.
Yeah, like an anole.
Yeah, yep.
Fascinating.
Super cool.
It's so fun how every now and then we crack open a bit of amber and we find a thing doing a thing that we've never seen anything do before.
That's just from a sci-fi horror movie.
Well, speaking of weird appendages from the Cretaceous period, I've also got a news. This one is about dinosaurs, and it's about appendages in a place where they're supposed to be.
Okay.
But they're unusual. This is research by Yoshitsugu Kobayashi et al. In iScience, and the article we will link to in the blog post is on Science Alert, also by Jess Cockrell. The dinosaurs in question are therizinosaurs.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Episode 207, therizinosaurs are theropod dinosaurs. They're two-legged. They are very unusual. They are kind of sloth-like, with short, squat back legs and big guts and long necks and small heads.
Like ground sloth.
Like ground sloth. That is
so
true.
Everyone's picturing a sloth right now.
They're
going,
just hanging from the trees. Therizinosaurs are often large. They are highly adapted for herbivory, eating plants. And one of the most famous things about them is their giant hand claws. This study reports a new species from the Gobi Desert of Mongolia from the Bayan Shiri Formation, which is mid-Cretaceous, about the same age as that amber, around 90 to 95 million years old.
Nice.
The species has been named Duonicus togbatari. The fossil remains consist of parts of the pelvis, bits of rib, vertebrae, and most of the 2 front arms.
Nice.
Overall, it is a mid-sized therizinosaur, about the size of a black bear. It's estimated to have been probably around 500 pounds. As the name suggests, Duonicus means 2 claws.
Whoa.
This therizinosaur has 2 fingers on each hand. Now, that's a weird thing for dinosaurs to do.
Yes.
Most theropod dinosaurs have 3 fingers on their front hands. Some of the really, really older dinosaurs, I think, might sometimes have more. A certain select handful have reduced down to 2, T-Rex being probably the most famous example. The reduction down to 2 fingers has never been seen before in therizinosaurs.
Yeah.
All therizinosaurs have 3-fingered hands. Outside of therizinosaurs, we've seen it in tyrannosaurs, some oviraptorosaurs. There are some allosaur relatives. This has happened a handful of times. But therizinosaurs, it is new. In particular, the fingers that most theropod dinosaurs are using are the first, second, and third finger, so thumb, index finger, and middle finger. In Duonicus, this new therizinosaur, the 3rd digit, so the middle finger on us, is lost. They've got just the front 2. Which is the ones that T-Rex has.
They got pinchy fingers.
Those finger bones are absent. The metacarpal for those fingers, the hand bone, is present as a little splint.
Okay.
Alongside the other bone, which, for example, is what you see if you ever look at a horse's skeleton. They've got these little splints of the side metacarpals on the side of their toes. Also, that little splint of the 3rd finger is present in T-Rex.
Yeah.
The little remnant of the finger that used to be there.
Yes.
This is very cool because it reveals another evolution of the loss of that 3rd finger, which has been seen in a bunch of different theropod groups, seemingly for different reasons in different groups.
Yeah.
In tyrannosaurs and other big predatory dinosaurs, the reduction of the fingers is also alongside the reduction of the arms themselves.
Yeah.
The arms are getting smaller, seemingly because the dinosaurs were replacing their arms functionally with their head and jaws.
Yeah. They're downsizing the arms and upgrading their face.
Yes.
So the entire package, size of the arm and number of digits, is going down.
But here in Duonicus, these appear to be functional fingers on large arms that they were using for grasping like other therizinosaurs. This also seems to be the case with some other herbivorous theropods that have reduced the fingers down. So they're reducing fingers for a different reason.
Yeah.
Not the whole arm's not being reduced, just this extra finger.
Yeah.
Perhaps for streamlining or whatever. The other thing that makes this discovery extremely cool and extremely unusual is that one of the claws on this fossil also preserves the claw sheath. We've talked about this on the podcast a bunch before. Episode 163, we talked all about claws. A claw is typically a bony last finger bone that is then also covered with a keratin sheath. This is also the case in like the horns of bison. That sheath is really important because it's the functional part of the claw.
Yeah.
It's the part that actually is being used. The sheath tends to be significantly longer than the actual bone and sharper.
Yeah.
Because again, it's the part that's actually doing the cutting.
Yeah. If you look at the toe bones of a cat, the claw bone is actually just a little nubbin. It starts the expression of the shape of the claw. You know, it points out, it's got a curve to it, but it's fully blunt. It is not very long. And then the claw exceeds like 3 times its length out.
Yes,
It's
and is very sharp.
Exactly. It's why you can trim a cat's claws back surprisingly far before you actually are hitting living tissue and you're nowhere near bone.
Yep.
Most of it is that keratin.
So we've known forever that dinosaur claws and other ancient animal claws had that keratin sheath over them, because basically all claws do, but we almost never find that preserved.
Yes.
One of the claws has the remains of this keratin sheath around it, which shows both the length and shape of the full claw.
because it's a therizinosaur, I'm just waiting for you to tell me it was like serrated.
And it was 20 feet long, and it was stuck inside
it had a
another
rotating
dinosaur.
blade.
It was like Helicoprion's jaws.
It's like I have no idea what to expect with these therizinosaurs.
The claw appears to be fairly normal. It is about 40% longer than the bone underneath. In total, 30 centimeters long of claw. Again, this is a mid-sized therizinosaur, so it has mid-sized therizinosaur claws. So its claws are only a foot long.
Just nearly a foot on the end of these powerful arms.
Which makes you wonder about the big ones.
Yep.
How long were your claws? The claw is also very strongly curved.
Okay.
It has a very strong curvature to it, which isn't... We talked about this in the Therizinosaurs episode. Therizinosaurus had relatively straight claws. These are very strongly curved, and the authors also note that the joints in the fingers seem to be very flexible.
Okay.
It looks like it had a lot of range of movement in the fingers. The shape of the claw and the flexibility of the finger joints support the idea that they were grasping with these hands.
Yes.
That they were using these to grab at stuff, probably grabbing at plants.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Again, this is the ground sloth comparison, and even bears.
Yeah, I was going to say, you compared to a black bear size. It's like, I could absolutely see them using it black bear style to hook food and bring it in, but even like pull bark away or something.
Mm-hmm. Or like, I don't know, pull up, get bugs out of stuff.
Yes.
Whatever sort of bear-like thing they're doing.
Trash cans again.
Opening trash cans. The problem is, the smartest therizinosaur, we've made this joke before. So this is an extremely cool find for a number of reasons. It reveals new things about therizinosaur evolution, and it just gives us a better look at a claw, and who better to find a claw from
Seriously.
than a therizinosaur.
It's also such an interesting example. We come across this at times when we look at fossil, and even modern ones, but especially in fossil organisms, where you come across interesting scenarios of a group like this that is known for prominent, complex, and very functional arms and hands and claws. Mm-hmm. And then this species has reduced a major part, but losing a full digit.
A third of their fingers.
And that always brings up the interesting evolutionary question of but that feels like being a
that's your whole thing.
Yeah, like being a roofer and you're removing rungs from your ladder.
Yeah, it feels like being a tetrapod and losing your limbs.
Yeah, exactly. Who would do that?
It's weird.
The second best animals would do that.
Rude. So rude. Second best by 3.
By 3.
It's an extremely insignificant margin. It's a very unexpected thing to see.
Yes.
But then at the same time, if your fingers are already huge and powerful, maybe you don't need all 3.
Well, it's got when you compare them to the horse splints. You're specialized in running. You're some of the best runners on the planet. You're getting rid of part of your foot? Well, it actually makes them better at running. It actually makes them more efficient runners. Mm-hmm. Maybe this one's doing something with its hand that a third digit's actually getting in the way.
These were the two-toed sloths of dinosaurs.
Yes.
They were climbing in trees. This one got buried when it came down to do a poop.
just swinging like orangutans.
Just a black 500 pounds. They probably weren't doing that. There's no evidence to suggest that they were living in trees.
But yeah, were you using these for an interesting behavior or as a specific kind of tool that other therizinosaurs weren't?
Yeah.
Oh, so cool.
Fascinating. Hey, one more kind of bit of news for us to just mention very quickly, and that is that Colossal Biosciences is out there claiming to have brought direwolves back from extinction. This is not an official news piece because A, it is not published.
Yes.
This is not published research as of this recording. And B, it's all over the news. Go read about it. But a bunch of people have already been asking us for our thoughts on it and our take, so we want to just very quickly, make a quick mention of it. From the reports that have come out, it sounds like Colossal did some exciting, different genetic techniques to make some edits to the DNA of the gray wolves that they used in this experiment. They have put a lot of effort into making this very exciting and very newsworthy and all over the news. And lots of people are very excited, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of our listeners are very excited to see all this. Will and I both agree that we have a lot of very major concerns about this whole enterprise. The way that Colossal has gone about rolling this out has been incomplete, and we feel misleading in a lot of ways, and just not very careful or responsible. They're doing a lot of publicizing before any scientific publication has come out. They're putting a lot of emphasis on the sensation and the advertising of it, and kind of leaving a lot of the science to the wayside in ways that feel disingenuous and uncomfortable. So we're not very excited about it. And there's a lot of conversation happening. There's tons of great pieces that are being written online. Riley probably has written something by the time this comes out, so go check that out.
Yes.
About the scientific and ethical concerns around the work that's being done there.
Yeah, it feels a lot more like a PR campaign than a scientific announcement right now. And that is enough to give us pause, let alone that it's also from a corporation that always raises the question of where in this is the plan to make money, because that is why corporations do what they do.
Yes.
So
our apologies to anyone out there who was excited by these announcements and was hoping to hear us also be excited. We're not. We have a lot of concerns. I find it very disturbing, actually, in a lot of respects. And that's it. That's all we got to say about that, at least for the time being. Like I said, there's a lot of conversation happening online, and there's a lot of great pieces highlighting these concerns.
Yeah, people are discussing in the Discord, so if you want a community to discuss stuff like this with, feel free to jump into the Discord.
Absolutely. Well, that's the news, so we can now move on to our main topic, where we get to learn about ferns. Woo! From our paleobotanical friend, Dr. Allie Baumgartner. Stay tuned after this brief musical interlude for Plants Time. Hello, Allie.
Hello, David.
Hi, Allie.
Hello, Will.
Welcome back to the podcast. Always a joy to have you here.
It feels like it's been so long.
Right?
Yeah, but also it doesn't, because we recorded other stuff recently, because we're making a whole spin-off podcast with you.
I realize it's not a secret. Yeah, we can talk about it.
It's not a secret. Leave it to us. That's the whole thing that's happening.
In the world.
It's out there. Pilot episode. Everybody check it out. It is on our feed. More to come.
Yeah.
But we're not here today to shamelessly plug our other thing that's coming up. We're here today to shamelessly geek out about ferns.
Yes, I'm very excited about this.
Ferns are an interesting group of plants for me, because they're a group of plants that I feel like I hear about a lot and know basically nothing about.
This is one of those where, like, I know they're different, but I don't know. And I know that I probably did know at one point in, like, intro botany or something.
Yeah, you do know this.
Why they were different.
Right. They've got fronds?
Yeah, but I don't know. I can't remember all the things that make them different, or like why they're different, but I know that they are distinct, and that's most of it.
So that's a big part of it.
Yes. So, Allie, let's get started. Please explain to us how ferns are distinct.
Okay, so the most obvious thing that makes ferns different than most other, at least vascular plants, is their spore bearing.
Yes.
That's the big thing. So they are vascular plants, so they are full of tubes, like gymnosperms and angiosperms, but they are spore bearing like liverworts, hornworts, and mosses.
Right. As opposed to seed bearing, like
Correct.
most of our familiar big plants.
Exactly. So they're they're the center of the Venn diagram of between vascular and non-vascular plants.
Yes, tubes but no seeds.
Yes, tubes but no seeds. Exactly. And then if we're going to get really pedantic, which we will. The sporophyte is the dominant life phase, which is the same as what we see in seed plants. Fun fact, I didn't realize this until I was putting this together, but then as soon as I learned it, I was like, yep, that checks out. So there are 3 groups of vascular plants. You have angiosperms, gymnosperms, and ferns.
Mm-hmm.
Gymnosperms are not particularly like speciose. We've talked about gymnosperms.
Yes, episode 155. And that's our conifers
Yes.
and things
Evergreens.
like that. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Angiosperms are super diverse, super speciose. They are the dominant life, form of vascular plants on Earth, and we've talked about those.
Yes, episode 57, flowering plants.
Yes, and the ferns are in between. So they are the second most diverse group of vascular plants, which makes sense. That's actually not surprising.
Yeah, they are super common. Like, they're not hard to find.
Right, they're everywhere. And way more things are actually ferns than you think.
Neat.
I got that impression when I was doing a little bit of Googling for this.
My favorite part was when you were putting together a draft of the outline and you texted me, ferns are a lot.
Ferns are a lot. Well, because I was like reading about ferns and I was like, oh, wait, this is a group of plants that has also been requested. Are those ferns? Do those get their own episode? Is that just a ferns?
Yeah.
I didn't know those were ferns.
Everything is secretly ferns.
There's a lot of apparently everything that isn't angiosperms and gymnosperms, I can just assume is a fern.
I've been ferns
yeah.
the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
All right, so let's get into it. What are ferns? Who is in this? Which of the what plants are within this group?
All right. So we're going to get a little bit into the history before we get into what's currently done, because depending on when you learned botany, you may have learned it slightly differently.
Yeah.
So things I was taught in school, which I don't even necessarily know were true then, don't necessarily reflect the current understanding. Mm-hmm. So historically, the understanding of ferns was you had the ferns and the fern allies.
Cool.
And I like to refer to them as ferns and friends. It's got a nice ring to it.
Ferns and fronds?
Ferns and fronds. Actually, okay, but no, because in order to be a fern, you have to have fronds. That was how they were historically classified.
Fronds and friends.
Fronds and friends. That's more accurate.
So real quick, for Will, what's a frond? Like, what defines a frond? I know Will doesn't know.
Right. So if you remember back to our leaf episode.
Yes, 195.
Where y'all let me go off on leaves. I did talk about how ferns have fronds. And so these are these very large dissected megaphyll leaves. So they're vascularized and they tend to be pretty substantially dissected.
Dissected meaning that they've got like little like leaflets.
Separate parts.
Yes, indentations. They're not necessarily completely separated. I could go into the details of the leaves. I will not. This is not that episode. But fronds, if you think about like cycads too, that's rather frond-like.
Okay, so fronds is the shape of the leaves.
Correct. Yes, exactly. Ferns have fronds. And so historically, if you were a vascular plant that bore spores and you had fronds, you were considered a fern. And everybody else, so you were vascular and you had spores, but you didn't have fronds, you were a fern ally.
Okay. All right. Makes sense.
Which makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. And so the fern allies, the things that don't, I have been referring them in my outline as classical ferns. So like, when you think of fern, that is a classical fern. And then things like lycophytes or horsetails, they got tubes. And they have spores, but they don't have fronds. Yeah. Those were lumped under fern allies. Neat. However, that's not a real group.
Yeah.
It makes a whole lot of sense when you look at them, but if you do any sort of digging phylogenetically, that's not a real group. However, there is some truth to it. So now you basically have ferns in the very general sense is everybody. That includes everyone who is vascular with spores.
Okay.
However, there is a division. So in general, it's probably better to say you could probably call lycophytes ferns if you were being really general. It'd be better to call them near ferns or fern allies, or say ferns and lycophytes. So lycophytes are the outgroup to everybody else. They are doing their own thing. They split a long time ago.
Okay.
And we'll get into more detail, like who they are specifically.
Okay, great.
Don't worry. I'm not just going to throw these terms at you and abandon you. Just hold on to that. Lycophytes and the rest. And so within that group, you have the club mosses, you have the spike mosses, and you have the quillworts.
Cool.
Okay, so that's kind of their own group, right? And then the rest of the ferns have things that were historically separated out. So horsetails are actually in fern proper.
That was the one that got me.
Yeah.
When I was looking, I was like, horsetails?
Yeah.
That's not a fern.
I have a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm. Not the fern.
I have a quote about that in a second.
Oh, great.
Also, if you've ever heard of a whisk fern, so these are twigs with miniature tennis balls on them is the best way to describe them. So they are basically just little sticks with these teeny tiny little yellow balls. They've got no visible leaves. That's a whisk fern. Historically, they were not counted in ferns. Now we realize, no, that's just a weirdo.
Okay.
And then you have that looks like a ferns. So you talked about horsetails. I feel the same way. I still have this little twinge of horsetails aren't ferns. And I found this delightful quote that was, however, the division between the horsetails and the other ferns is so ancient that many botanists, especially paleobotanists, still regard this group as fundamentally separate at the higher level. They have been separate for so long. That's I feel weird about. I mean, I'm sure y'all know what you're talking about, but I don't like it.
But also no.
Well, we've talked about what calling snakes lizards.
Yes.
It's technically, but it's been 200 million years.
But that's so misleading.
And they're so different. Yes.
Right. Exactly. And when you look at it, you're that's a different thing.
Yes.
That is a fundamentally different thing. In the fossil record, you're not going to have a fern and a calamites and be yes, I cannot tell the difference.
Yeah.
But very smart people say that they are the same, and I will repeat what they are saying.
I will fight. I will fight to the death for the right.
We will agree to disagree on your facts.
Yes, exactly. So broadly speaking, there are two main groups: ferns proper, fern adjacent, and we'll get into more detail of who's actually in those groups.
Cool. Neat.
Great. Well, I would love some visuals to go with our discussion. So if you would, before we get into all the various different groups, give us the anatomy.
Paint us a picture of a fern.
Paint us a picture of a fern, but with your words, because this is a podcast.
Yes, this is an audio medium. I am sorry and you're welcome. We're going to talk about plant sex, specifically alternation of generations.
Amazing.
No.
Fantastic.
Very different reactions.
It's one of those where it's I haven't played this video game, but I've heard about this level.
So there are two things in particular that make people think that plants are hard to study. One is whole genome duplication, polyploidy.
What, they just a whole genetic code. They just went, and another one.
Me.
Yes, don't worry. We'll talk about that more later. And then the other thing that people kind of get overwhelmed by is the alternation of generations.
Right.
So if you haven't thought about this ever, or haven't thought about this in a long time, the alternation of generations is the life cycle, of plants, where they will separate out the haploid and diploid. So basically, do you have one set of chromosomes or two sets of chromosomes? Sometimes into two separate free living life forms.
Right.
Yeah.
So in us, for example, we have the haploid and diploid phases, but our haploid, the half of the set of chromosomes, is exclusively in sperm and egg cells.
Yes.
In our gametes, our reproductive cells. They are not free living.
Nope.
They spend basically anything important they ever do is just inside of the body.
Yes.
And then they develop
Yes.
into
Yes.
us. We are the diploid. So for us animals, the idea, we are diploid and then we use some haploid cells
Yes.
to make more of us. So the idea of the haploid version just going off and living its own life,
Yeah.
like sperm cells let loose into the wild, going off and just existing.
Funnily
Yes.
enough, that's always been my headcanon for how facehuggers work with aliens.
Right.
Is that is the alien haploid
Yes.
going off to find its host.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that's not quite what's going on here. So I'm going to try to go through this pretty generally because, we do need to go over it, but we're not going to get too in the weeds about it. Okay. So for vascular plants, so ferns and angiosperms and gymnosperms, the sporophyte is the dominant form. So when you think about a tree, you are looking at a sporophyte. You cannot, actually most cases have probably never seen the gametophyte form. So the sporophyte is, it says it right in the name, it is the spore making part of the plant,
Yes.
right? Okay, so it produces spores via meiosis. These are making spores that are haploid. So they have one set of chromosomes, genetic material.
Right. Which
And
is the same
releases
thing that we do.
Yes.
Correct.
We
Yep.
create haploid cells that then turn into more people.
Exactly. And so that is released out into the world, which is not what we do.
Yes.
So under the right conditions, the spore will then germinate by mitosis into the gametophyte. Okay, so now we have a free living gametophyte. And this is, it's typically very small, like very small.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's even subterranean.
Yeah.
But this contains the sex organs that you probably have either never heard of or haven't thought of since maybe high school.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the archegonium, which makes the ova, and the antheridium, which makes the sperm.
Gotcha.
Right. Okay. So they tend to be very, very small. They depending on the type, they might not live for very long. So the archegonium produces ova. The antheridium produces flagellated sperm because these things need to move.
Yeah. Yep.
Like they gotta go. And so the sperm will swim to the ova and then fertilizes. And then the fertilization forms a diploid zygote. So again, we have a haploid, they go together. We have two sets of chromosomes, which is like us again.
Yes.
Right.
And then that will grow to form the sporophyte.
Yeah.
Right. So alternation of generations basically means, again, to use our comparison, if our sperm and egg cells went off into the world and existed as their own little organisms, that means that if you are a, full grown as we think of it, your offspring are a different type of organism that lives fundamentally differently. And then those at some point come together to make the next generation, which is much more like you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's like if only every other generation was a human being and the rest were some weird little cell thing.
Yes.
That's what a lot of plants are doing.
That's what all plants are doing.
That's what all plants are doing. That's just like I said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, alternation of generations is pretty fundamental to being plants.
Yes. Funnily enough, a lot of fungi also do very similar things.
Yeah,
This is true.
yeah.
Another reason why they were put together there for a very, very long time.
Yep.
So most other vascular plants have very reduced gametophytes. Like they're actually not free living in angiosperms. And so that's why I wanted to really emphasize this for ferns, because it's kind of your last opportunity to have this kind of stark difference before you get into more palatable, I guess, versions of it.
Right.
Okay, so spores. I keep talking about spores. So spores are not seeds. They are haploid. They have not been fertilized. They are before that step.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There is homospory and there is heterospory. So based on just those names, what do you think that means?
The spores are either the same or they're different.
Yeah.
In what way?
Same plant in different plants?
Same size and different size.
Oh.
Right? So ancestrally, all of the spores are the same size, like male, female, like all of them are the same size. One kind of sporangium, which is where they're like the spores are stored, that's the ancestral condition. But heterospory evolved where you have the two different sizes of spores. So the female spores are much bigger. The male spores are much smaller. So a megaspore and a microspore. And then that means you have two different sizes of sporangia, megasporangia and microsporangia.
Once again, similar to us.
Yeah.
Our
Yes.
gametes, right? Sperm cells are very small and egg cells are comparatively gigantic.
Yep.
Yes. So this arose in the Devonian at least 3 times.
Wow.
Yes. And there are 4 extant groups of plants that are heterosporous.
All right.
So 2 of which are lycophytes, so spike mosses and quillworts. And then 1 order of like classical ferns. And then all seed plants.
Sure.
Yeah. No. Fair.
Pollen versus the other.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which obviously that checks out.
That is very accurate.
Yeah. So now that I've given you like the basics of some of the terminology that I'm going to be using, we're going to run through. I'm going to warn you now, I'm actually going to spend more time talking about the things you've never heard of and less time talking about the things you have heard of in order to give you a very broad overview of ferns. So this is going to be kind of a whistle stop tour. Let's go. You ready?
Ready.
Excellent.
All right. Okay. Also, fair warning, I'm going to use probably like 4 different names for the same group of plants, depending on what word comes out my mouth. So within the not ferns, right, the fern friends, so that group is the lycopods, or maybe the lycopsids, or maybe the lycophytes. Like, depending on what word comes out of my mouth, that's all this. That's the same friends. Okay,
Yeah,
those are the
gotcha.
fern friends. So the lycopodiales, that order, that group within that broad group of not ferns. So these they look like gymnosperms. So they are often, like, their common names are often talking about like how they look like little conifers.
Mm-hmm.
They're normally really short. There's about 17 accepted genera, about 500 species. So it's pretty speciose.
All right.
These have microphyll leaves. Do you remember what microphyll leaves are?
Little ones.
Tiny.
You are so right. You could be more right.
Probably. I could be a botanist.
It's usually the case.
I taught you this.
Yeah, you did.
I did. So anyway, so a microphyll leaf is, yes, very small, but it is also not vascularized. So it
Right.
tends to have a single vein, and that is it. So lycophytes have microphyll leaves. That was one of their uniting factors. The sporangia, so again, that's where the spores are stored, are on the upper side of the leaves, if they have like the little like baby leaves, or on the stems themselves. The gametophyte is super small, typically is subterranean, but they can persist for like 15 years
Wow.
before making gametes. They could just chill in the soil, and they are often mycoheterotrophs.
We learned about those
Uh-huh.
that are feeding off of fungi.
Yeah.
Yes. So they are making fungi friends.
Episode 201.
Because they are underground.
Yeah.
That's actually something you'll see not uncommonly in a lot of these groups for their gametophytes.
Right. So this is the lycophyte group. So that's your spike mosses and...
So this is just club mosses.
Just club mosses. Okay.
Just club mosses. Yes. So this is right. Common name. That's the other thing I might call it is a club moss.
Yes.
So they tend to be really small, maybe 5 to 20 centimeters tall. And they are cosmopolitan. So they can be found anywhere on Earth. They are most abundant in mountain regions, so tropical mountains or alpine regions. They can be either terrestrial or epiphytic. We do have some here in Michigan. This is not like the center of their diversity, but they exist and they are protected. So next one is quillworts. Have you ever heard of isoetes?
No.
Oh, David's making faces like maybe deep in there. So isoetes is one of those like trivia fun fact kind of plants because again, like they're weirdos. They're called quillworts. They have the strangest little leaves. They're again microphyll leaves and they are hollow, which is why they have that. They are so narrow and they are hollow. So there's a single genus, isoetes, about 200 species. They look like they are trying to do an onion impression, right? So they have like a kind of bulb-like rhizome and then these like little teeny little leaves coming out of it. And it looks like it's trying to be an onion. And the sporangia are like deep in those leaf bases. The gametophyte, this is weird. The gametophyte grows inside the spores.
Huh.
It is never free living.
So the spore just contains a little organism that is the next generation.
Okay, so the sporophyte makes the spore. The spore forms the gametophyte. When the gametophyte is fertilized, it makes a sporophyte,
Right.
which is then released from the spore.
Gotcha.
So there is a sporophyte inside the gametophyte, which is inside the sporophyte.
Weird.
This is like aphids.
Yeah.
When they're born pregnant.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. Well, this is like homunculi.
Yeah.
The old school hypothesis. Just quillworts are just an eternal, ever smaller sequence.
All the way down.
Quillworts all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. They are, again, also quite small. They tend to be like 2 to 20 centimeters tall. So like less than an inch to maybe 8 inches. But some mondo ones can be like 100 centimeters long, like 40-inch long leaves. That's weirdos, though. Like there aren't a whole lot with love, but there aren't a whole lot of those. So they're aquatic and cosmopolitan. So they're found pretty much all over the world, but no species tend to have a lot of members. They tend to be pretty scarce to rare, even though they are common. There are many species, but any given species doesn't have a lot of individuals. Weirdly, they also use CAM photosynthesis, which is, for those of you who don't remember, and that's okay, CAM photosynthesis is the weirdo one. Like, it's the other one that people like to bring up. So photosynthesis is, C3, that's the normal one. C4, you separate the steps in space if you have dry conditions. And if you have really arid conditions, you might separate the steps of photosynthesis in time. That's CAM. But that's normally if water is the limiting factor.
Yeah.
And these are aquatic.
Yeah.
Right.
So it seems that there's something different going on there. It seems like they came to this conclusion independently.
I mean, I'm more productive at night. So like I can get it.
Yeah. You're not distracted by the sun or anything like that. Yeah. And then the last group within the not classical ferns are the selaginelles. Have you ever heard of selaginella?
No.
That's okay. Have you heard of resurrection fern?
Yeah. I had one.
Yeah. That's selaginella. So there is one genus, more than 750 species. They have microphyll leaves, but they are like more complicated looking microphyll leaves. They don't look like microphyll leaves. And their sporangia, so that's where the spores come from, are in cones. These little strobili, these cute little cones.
That's what those were.
Yeah. So they are very small, 5 to 20 centimeters. Again, I actually also had one.
Yeah.
They smell really funny when you let them dry out. So they are mostly tropical, but they can be found in Arctic and alpine zones. And like I said, yeah, they are called resurrection ferns. They have a lot of adaptations to help them deal with desiccation. They can pretty much completely dry out, and then you get them wet again. They're like, okay, yes, I'm back.
And they unfurl, and it's really fun.
Very cool. Well, they have cones like we think of with conifers.
A similar sort of thing, yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So that's those are the fern friends. So now we can dive into ferns proper. So within ferns proper, there are broadly 2 categories of ferns. And I'm going to start with the weirdos, again, with love. These are the eusporangiate ferns. I'm not going to get into the difference between eusporangiate and leptosporangiate. Just know that they're different. It has to do with the number of spores. I tried to read into it and realized I don't have to, and moved on.
Listen, put in your requests now for an episode about leptosporangiate and eusporangiate.
And we're going to find someone else to talk about.
Yeah.
So within the eusporangiate ferns, the first group is the horsetails. The ones that don't seem like they're ferns. So there is a single living genus of horsetails, Equisetum, and there's only about 20 species.
Okay.
So there's not a whole lot of them. So horsetails, they are invasive in a lot of places and used for like decoration ornamentally. So you may have seen them. They look like green sticks with little nodes on them, and you can pull them apart at the nodes.
Yeah.
I love them. I think they're so cute. I think I've told the story, I think, on the podcast multiple times, but we went plant collecting, and my colleague said, "Hey, Allie, you're a paleobotanist. Look, Equisetum." And I got really excited.
Yeah.
I love Equisetum. Anyway, so they have highly reduced megaphyll leaves. So they were thought to have microphyll leaves, which is why they were originally grouped into the fern friends category. They also have their sporangia and strobili, like the things we saw in the fern friends category. They tend to be 20 centimeters to maybe 1.5 meters tall, so between 8 inches and 5 feet. But some of the subtropical giant horsetails could be 5 to 8 meters tall.
Wow. So a tree.
Yeah, basically 16 to 26 feet. Like, they are trying to revisit their fossil roots.
Yes.
So they are pretty near cosmopolitan. They're not found in Antarctica, unsurprisingly, Australia, New Zealand, or Pacific Islands. And their center of diversity is concentrated in the non-tropical Northern Hemisphere. So like we have multiple species here in Michigan. They're not uncommon. They look like green sticks in the woods. It's great. So another group that we was originally classified as not ferns, fern friends, are the whisk ferns. So there are 2 genera, and there are about 12 species total, and they lack leaves. Like I said, they look like little sticks with miniature tennis balls on them. They are fused together into these teeny tiny little balls, and that is the main way that you can identify them. They're about 10 to 75 centimeters tall. They're not very big. They are mostly Psilotum, which is one genus, is mostly tropical and subtropical. We do find them in North America. The other genus, which I am not even going to attempt to say because it starts with TM, and I don't know how to make my mouth say that. It might be Semisperus.
Some call it Tim.
The fact that it starts with TM is, I've stared at this for so long. Reference acknowledged.
Silotus and Tim.
Yes. Those are pretty much exclusively found in like Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia, and the Philippines. Okay, maybe my favorite group of ferns are the Ophioglossids.
I like it already.
I know. They're great. So these are the adder's tongues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
These, I love them so much. They're very distinctive. So these have always, like, these are beginning to look like ferns. They don't look like not ferns. So there's not a whole lot of them. 4 to 5 genera or up to 14, depending on who's counting. About 70 species. So many of these species grow one leaf at a time.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes. So most proper ferns have their sporangia on a leaf. So the leaf that has the spores is called the sporophyll, the spore leaf, because the adder's tongues only have one leaf. They have it modified. So the tip of it is the sporophore, and it's modified to like basically kind of be like a cone. And so that's the part that is the adder's tongue. It is the skinny part on the top of it, and then the kind of the more traditional leaf part on the bottom. This also has a subterranean gametophyte that is a mycoheterotroph, which is very fun. So in this group, there are 2 genera that are known to have secondary growth. Do you know what it means to have secondary growth as a plant?
Wood?
Yeah.
I think it is mandatory in order to be a tree. So,
Right.
so primary growth is growing like up, right?
Right.
Secondary growth is growing out.
Right. Same.
Yes, I am also experiencing secondary growth.
Yeah, this is what gives it the tree rings.
Yes, exactly. So they have very limited secondary growth. So we're like, these are not tree ferns.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But it is very exciting because they could be.
The itty bitty trees.
So these sound extremely weird.
Oh, don't worry. I'm about to tell you another thing that makes them even weirder.
They're a single leaf that ends in a weird spore thing.
Yeah.
And they grow outwards a little.
Yes.
Yes. Also, Ophioglossum, which is the genus that they're named after, has the highest chromosome count of any known multicellular organism.
So,
Huh.
to put it before you say the thing, we have 46 chromosomes.
Yes.
Yeah.
In each of your cells, unless some people have unusual chromosome circumstances.
Yes,
but
yes.
generally speaking, humans have 46 chromosomes.
Yes. So 23 pairs.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Ophioglossum reticulatum.
I love how much snake there is in the name of these. The reticulated adders.
Aren't they great?
Amazing.
Have been counted to have up to 720 pairs.
Wow.
Pairs. 1,440 chromosomes.
Leave some for the rest of us.
Wow.
Per cell, right?
put 'em
Per
all?
cell. Great question. In your cells.
So is this one of those whole genome duplication
Oh,
scenarios where they
Yeah.
were just like, what if we copy and pasted the
Yes.
entire genome
That is, yes.
like 1,000 times?
That is precisely
Cool.
that what has happened.
Just nuclei filled to bursting
Yep.
inside the cells with chromosomes.
It's that scene in Evolution where they crack the slide.
Yes.
But they were still starting with a lot because it's basically divisible by, I think it's 120 I saw. So they already had a lot. And then they're like, let's double it.
Wow.
Insane.
Yes. In this same genus, Ophioglossum malvae is the smallest known pteridophyte that is 1 centimeter tall.
Oh.
What a great group of plants. This is, as we've talked about, I love weird stuff.
Yep.
Yes. Ferns
That's
are full of weird.
Yeah, this is great.
So adder's tongues have a cosmopolitan distribution. Y'all can go find one for yourself outside. I hope you do. I have for real seen adder's tongue in Tennessee. So y'all can go find one.
All right. We don't have
Okay.
adders, but we got that plant.
The closest thing, if you don't have adders, store bought is fine.
Yeah, right. We have adders back home.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so the last of the weirdos are the Moratiales. So this group, there's about 6 genera, roughly 110 species. They have the largest fronds of any ferns.
Okay.
They are massive, and they have these really like fleshy root stalks. So they are like just very distinctive looking ferns. The sporangia are on the underside of the leaves. This is very common with most ferns.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Do these have a common name?
No,
Great.
so I can't help you with that.
Yep,
Sorry.
Yep.
They're the meritioid ferns.
Great.
It really rolls off the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, they can be like their fronds can be quite large. Some of the fronds can be 9 meters long, so like 30 feet long.
Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, they're tropical.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes,
Yeah.
they would have to be.
They would have to be like that. Okay, so those are the weirdo ferns. So those are the eusporangiate ferns. They make up, there's roughly 255 species. The vast majority of fern diversity are these leptosporangiate ferns.
Sure. The other group.
The other group.
So this is something that we run into. This happens with our animal groups sometimes, but this seems to happen a lot when we go into plants.
Mm-hmm.
That you have a group and there is a typical version of it that you picture, like with ferns. But then there's just this wild diversity of a whole bunch of lineages within that major group that have done a whole bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it both is really exciting and impressive to see just how much diversity you have within this one group.
Right.
But it also makes episodes like this difficult.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's very difficult to say, what is a fern?
Yes.
Yes.
Because the answer is that ferns includes all of this stuff.
Yes.
And it's a feature of the way that both the way that plants versus animals evolve.
Yes.
And their respective limitations on the things that they can evolve, but also the way that we think about and classify plants versus animals.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is really interesting too, because I feel like, the end members of the like spectrum of a group in plants can be just so much fundamentally weirder than in animals. And a lot of it is because of the lack of restrictions of morphology.
Yeah.
You don't need to have 4 legs and a head. You
Correct.
can kind of, like when we talked about crocodiliforms,
Mm-hmm.
and like we have crocodile, which is a very classic shape. But then when you get into the outskirts of that group, they're on land, and some of them are bipedal, and some of them are fully marine, and there's all of this diversity. But even then,
they're still croc-shaped.
They all have 4 legs and a head.
Yep.
Because you have to. You can't be an animal. Well, you can't be a reptile.
Yes.
Right.
Generally, without your 4 legs and a head. You kind of
can't be a
need that
vertebrate.
shape.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like I keep bringing this up whenever I talk to anybody about plants. Plants are modular.
Yes. Exactly.
They are Legos, and you can just put them together in a slightly different order and get a completely different thing. And some of the parts, like there aren't very many parts, but some of them are optional.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, especially when you're playing with stuff like genome duplications.
Yes.
Where it's like, if you think multiplying a leaf isn't a difficult task, when I can multiply my genome, that makes it child's play to add or delete parts.
Yes. Not to mention that, as we discussed, these are organisms that spend half of their generations as a completely different type of organism.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And one of the cool things about the alternation of generations, really, I'm trying to plug it as if there's anything that we could like do.
We'll do an episode of Leave It to Us about alternation of generations.
Oh, I would love to. But the cool thing about it is because the gametophyte is free living, kind of, a lot of times, it means that if you get any sort of mutation that might be bad, it's just going to die.
Yeah.
So it kind of helps to prevent these sort of like deleterious things from being passed along because the gametophyte dies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like if our sperm cells in humans, for example, a sperm cell doesn't need to do very much.
Correct.
It doesn't need to live by itself. So it's free to carry a whole bunch of mutations all the way to the egg and the fertilization stage.
It's kind of a trial run with you need to be functional enough to survive on your own.
Yes, exactly.
All right. let's talk about normal ferns.
All right. Finally.
We talked about fern friends. We talked about ferns' weird uncles, like the weird cousins that we don't talk about.
Yes,
now
exactly.
we're in the core ferns family.
Right. So this is the majority of ferns. If you think about a fern, it's probably one of these ferns. They make up roughly 80% of or more of fern diversity. So there are 7 orders within this group, about 44 families, roughly 300 genera, and about 10,000 species.
There you go.
So the rest of the ferns, 255 species.
Right.
Right? Like, big difference in numbers. So, like, this is when I'm talking about the classical fern, this is what I'm talking about. So, same thing. The sporangia tend to be on the underside of the leaves. Sometimes they will be in these densely aggregated clusters called sori.
Yeah.
Which allows us to have one of the most, I would argue, famous puns in botany. When you look at the underside of a fern frond and say, that's a site for sore eyes. I'm so sorry, but also not at all.
This is what our listeners are paying for.
Yes. There's more puns on the other podcast.
That's true. Let's just go check it out.
This is true. So they have a cosmopolitan distribution, like I said, most ferns. So I'm going to rattle off some famous ferns that fall into this group. So basically, I'm going to say what I think is a famous fern and see if you have heard of them.
Ready to disappoint.
It's going to be. Here we go.
All right, I think I'll start with I'm going to start from the beginning of my list. I'm about to be really upset. Okay. Cinnamon fern?
No.
I assume it smells great.
No, it's the color. So that's Asmundastrum cinnamomum. Oh no, we're not off to a good start. Have you heard of the regal fern?
No.
Mm-mm.
Golly, have you ever heard of a fern?
I know the ones that close their leaves.
Sensitive fern.
Sensitive ferns.
When I think
we
of ferns,
we had them at the aquarium.
I think of fossils.
Yeah.
When they're smooshed into the sediment and they've got all the little,
I have some
leaflets
back there.
Sticking off.
I have
Dead ferns.
Dead ferns.
Allie from the future here. You will hear me call Azolla duckweed. This is why scientists like scientific names, because sometimes we get tripped up by common names. So common names for Azolla are actually mosquito fern, water fern, fairy moss. Duckweed is actually an angiosperm called lemna. Sorry for the confusion. Now you know more.
Have you heard of duckweed?
Yes.
Azolla.
All right.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that more in the second half.
Great.
Have you heard of bracken fern?
No.
It sounds familiar, but I don't know what it is.
Okay, well, it's a fern.
Great. I assume it lives in partially salty water.
No, it does not. It has nothing to do with that. So bracken fern, I don't know if this is true. This may be an old wives' tale, but it is something that I did when I went to the University of Michigan Biostation. We were told that if you put fronds of bracken fern in your hat, it would keep the black flies off. And I don't know if it was true, but we all did it.
Okay.
Well, all right. Did you get any black flies?
I don't remember. I'm going to go with no. And then finally, this one I'm confident you've heard of because David and I talked about this yesterday. Tree ferns.
Yes. Tree ferns I've heard of. I don't actually really know what tree ferns are.
Yeah.
But I've heard of tree ferns.
There is a particular order that they are associated with. They just get big. They tend to have a stem, right? They are much more of a tree habit. It's not a proper tree habit, but they are reminiscent of trees. And they're exclusively found in the tropics today.
Yeah.
Do they have secondary growth?
No.
Okay. All right. So they're not doing that good an impression.
In name alone.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, like it was
they're just big.
Yeah. They're just big.
Tree sized.
They are tree shaped, but not real. I mean, they're trees in the same way that palms are trees.
Yeah.
Sure.
They have tree ambition.
Yes, exactly. But yes, so that is You now know everything you need to know about fern morphology and diversity.
All right.
I'm so proud of you.
And here I thought I already knew everything I needed to know.
Then we're good to go. See you in Fortnite.
Yeah, we're all set.
Don't you want to know about the fossils?
You just said.
We're going to go out into the world. Now we're fern experts.
You just told me.
I said diversity and morphology. I didn't say anything about their history.
I'm coming for Allie's job. So listen, I took a 30-minute course on fern morphology and diversity, and I think I could run this herbarium.
I am technically in charge of the ferns.
Yes.
Well, see, there you go.
Fern frenemy.
Yes.
I thought you were going to say, and this might also be true, that you are technically in charge of hiring.
I am also. That is also true.
So I'm not coming for Allie's job.
You are not coming for my job.
This is just going to be the interview. Be, have you heard of this fern?
So, yeah, exactly. No? Oh, I'm so sorry.
When we interview students to work in the herbarium, the first thing we ask them is basically like, what's your name? What's your major? Tell us why you want this job. What's your favorite plant?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you know.
Which just hilariously and completely honestly, I wouldn't have an answer to that question.
That's okay. People have said dandelion or tomato. Like, they have just told me things they like. That's fine. That's totally fine. So one thing
Great.
that
Audrey too.
Honestly,
big fan.
We could work with that. So I said this before we started recording, but like, I made this sound way more streamlined than it is in reality. The big groups people tend to agree on the like where the lines are and like what level we're like taxonomic level we're talking about. No one can agree on.
Yeah.
And I was telling the guys that before we did our big fern digitization project, the University of Michigan's ferns were organized alphabetically by genus. And that still upsets me. I'm so glad it's not anymore. Now they are by family. It makes me much happier.
That's not how you do it.
No, well, I mean, it's one way to do it, but I don't like it.
Man, now I have the thought of if scientists discover a planet with its own, biosphere, and they get to like from scratch name the phylogeny of that life on that planet, the urge to correctly phylogenetically put them, but also make it alphabetical would be very strong.
The urge to not make the same mistakes we made back on Earth.
But then when you inevitably have to adjust it, someone's going to have to ruin that alphabetical word.
The same mistakes that we made.
Yes.
Hey, speaking of mistakes and things that are extremely confusing in terms of their classification and identification, what do you say we talk about the fossil record?
I love that transition.
Excellent. We're doing this for 200 episodes. Let's take a short break for a musical interlude, and then when we return, we'll have Allie tell us about the certainly more clear-cut and straightforward world of fern fossils and evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Allie, as I said earlier sometime in this episode, when I think of ferns, my mind actually first goes to the fossil record, even though ferns exist today.
Yes.
Ferns are an extremely famous, in my mind, it feels like they are the most famous fossil plants.
Oh, I think that's a fair assessment.
Well, great. I'm glad that you agree. So, tell us about the fossil record of ferns. Why is the fern fossil record so famous? What's out there? Give us let's dive in.
I love that you said famous because I have 3 sections under here that all start with famous.
Yeah, there's a lot. These are famous fossils. They're the trilobites of plants.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they really are.
I guess actually they're more like the brachiopods of plants.
Yes.
In that they're still around.
Yes.
Actually, they aren't extinct, actually.
Important point. This was fun because I feel like the last couple episodes, I have been really struggling to find fossils.
I'm still traumatized from cacti.
I was about to say, because some of your groups just refuse to play the game.
That is still one of the funniest. And parasitic plants and cacti.
Yep.
Yeah, like we've had a couple of I tried so hard to like manifest a fossil and they don't exist. I had the opposite of that problem with this. I had to figure out how am I going to frame this because I can't just tell you everything because we don't have time.
Yep.
Like if I was just like reading every fossil fern, like that is its own like ASMR podcast.
In alphabetical order.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. So I have this kind of into 3 sections. So there's fossil ferns and friends, fossil or famous fossil sites that have ferns, and then famous fern events.
Ooh.
Okay, so famous fossil ferns and friends. I set myself up for failure
This
with
is
that
great.
title.
The 4 Fs.
Yes. Famous fossil ferns and friends. I did well the time before. Okay, so some of the most famous plants, like fossil plants that are ferns, but we don't think of them as ferns, the lycophytes.
Mm-hmm.
So like Asteroxylon is a very ancient plant. That is a lycophyte. So not a proper fern friend. Lepidodendron.
That's the one.
There you go.
That's the one.
The scale tree.
Yes, I love Lepidodendron. I very recently gave a guest lecture in a plant biology class, and it was basically a crash course in paleontology for a bunch of botanists. And we talked about how Lepidodendron is a prime example of the difficulty of the plant fossil record because plants are modular.
Yes. So Lepidodendron, dear listeners, if you look at fossils, you've almost certainly seen Lepidodendron.
Mhm.
These are most famously preserved as trunks, or often like an impression of
Yes.
a trunk
Yeah.
Yes.
that has this diamond-shaped scale pattern.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
is where
And
the
that,
name comes from.
right. Scale tree.
We had a person bring a Lepidodendron fossil into the museum once many years ago who was convinced that it was snakeskin.
Yep. Because it does look real similar.
Makes perfect sense. There's a reason that it's called Lepidodendron. But the thing about Lepidodendron is that depending on the organ, depending on the part of the plant that you have, it actually has a different name.
Yep.
So Lepidodendron is just referring to the trunk. If you're talking about the roots, or like the rhizome, that's Stigmaria. That
Also
you may
very famous.
also have probably heard of. Probably less famous are Leptostrobus. So that's reproductive organs, right? The strobilus is where the spores come from. And Lepidophyloides, those are the leaves. So it's one of the it's a game, right?
Yeah.
You gotta find 2 parts together, and then you know they go together, and
Yes.
eventually you figure out the whole thing.
Well, because we've talked about that before. That is often the case with plants that
Yes.
the leaf, the branch, the flower
Yes.
are not usually all on the same fossil.
Yes.
So like trace fossils, we have to name them separately until we
Yes.
get enough evidence to go, same plant.
Yes.
Yeah.
In much the same way that feathers don't tend to preserve in the same conditions
Yes.
as the rest of the dinosaur skeleton does.
Right. And plants are actually very similar. We'll use form taxa similarly to the way that you will with trace fossils, right? Because we like, even if you're pretty confident that these things go together, until you find them associated, like technically we gotta separate them out.
So you're naming it based on the shape it is.
Yes, the
not
part of the plant.
based
Yeah.
on what family or species it
Yes.
actually belongs to.
Yes, and maybe eventually you collect enough parts
Yes.
to figure out what it is.
Some assembly required.
Oh, absolutely. It is a blessing and a curse of paleobotany. Because that's the thing, right? Like we get our sample sizes can be enormous,
Yeah.
but they are disassembled.
So Lepidodendron, I can't help but notice another tree-shaped
Yeah.
fern thing.
Yes. Exactly. Like that's the thing. We'll get to this in a little bit, but like the modern size ferns and lycophytes and lycopods and lycopsids, all those friends, does not reflect the diversity that we saw in the fossil record.
Well, Lepidodendron and a lot of these are Carboniferous and
Yes.
late Paleozoic,
Yes.
which is before we had flowering plants
Yes.
making lots of trees and before we had a lot of this modern big plant diversity.
Yes.
So I would imagine it was easier to make your way as a giant fern without the modern
right.
competition for it.
Right. And so if you think about, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when I talk about like the actual like history, but the Carboniferous is also before the spread of gymnosperms.
Yes.
So like this is the time of the ferns. They went big, they went hard, they took over. They are everywhere in the Carboniferous. So another friend that was doing big things in the past, which is technically a fern, horsetails.
Yeah.
Right.
So not a friend, actual fern. Horsetails have an excellent fossil record. Possibly my favorite fossil is Calamites. I'm obsessed with Calamites. This is the stem of these giant horsetails, because this is another example of a form taxon, right? So Calamites is specifically looking at the stem of these giant tree-sized horsetails.
So while Lepidodendron has the diamond scale-like pattern,
Yes.
Calamites is the one with these
Striations.
these longitudinal ridges that run
Yup.
down the whole thing.
And sometimes you'll see the nodes, just like you do in the modern,
Yeah.
where they would fit together. And
Yeah.
because these are form taxa, so the Calamites is referring to the stem. If you have leaves, and these, like in the fossil record, they're leafier than they are today. That's Annularia. So you'll see those two.
Gotcha. How big did these ancient
That's a good
horsetails get?
question. They get quite large.
Okay.
Yeah, so they are medium-sized trees, so 100 feet tall, so 30 meters tall.
Woo.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's medium when you compare it to like large trees.
Yeah.
Longer than a horse.
Yes. Longer than a horse.
That's a reference to a different thing that we do.
Yeah, golly. So they absolutely wonderful fossil record. Another classical fern, another like favorite fossil of mine is what you were referring to, David, of just like when you think of a fern on a rock, you'll see those very commonly from the Carboniferous, like Pacopterus is the famous one of those. I can't tell you who is who. I just know that's a fern, but sometimes there are secretly seed ferns, and that's complicated. We're not going to talk about that right now. So, speaking of famous sites, so this is very funny. I don't know if I've told you. I think I have told you guys this. Until you did the Maison Creek episode,
Episode 110.
I did not know that Maison Creek had animals.
Fantastic. Maison Creek is where the Tully
Tully
monster is from.
Yeah, I know. You know what is not a priority for me? Animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have worked with Maison Creek nodules so many different times. Like I've done multiple different labs with them. And so I associated it like Maison Creek. Yeah, these ferns.
Yep.
And then I was listening to the episode and y'all keep talking about animals. I'm like, is this the same Maison Creek? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Anyway, so Maison Creek is also Carboniferous. It's Pennsylvanian specifically. It's in Illinois. It's a wonderful episode. If you want to hear about the animals, you should listen to that.
If you're so inclined.
If you like animals,
Someday maybe we'll do a follow-up episode with Allie where we'll revisit all of our fossil site episodes and just talk about the plants.
Yeah. Thank you. Because I'm going to be honest, you did not talk about the plants nearly as much as I wanted you to.
No.
That's
Sure
literally
did.
what I am here for, though. So the really cool thing about the Maison Creek flora, though, is that they form these nodules. So you break them open and you see these just beautifully preserved fern fronds, and like they're stunning. You can see such detail on them. It's great. I've worked with them before. So you'll see a lot of like copsids, so including lepidodendron and stigmaria. You'll see horsetails, including calamites and anularia. You'll see the classical fern Pacopterus, and lots and lots and lots and lots of seed ferns. So the nodules tend to be this kind of like reddish brown color. They tend to have like dark colored fossils on them. Like the impression itself is dark colored. In contrast with another locality. So this is very funny. When I was looking up famous fern fossil sites, and I realized when I finally found this one, I was like, oh, that's where those are from. Because I have seen so many of these fossils, but I did not know where they were from. So the Llewellyn Formation, which is also Carboniferous, also Pennsylvania, actually from Pennsylvania.
So we're in the 330 million years old or so.
Yeah. So this is actually from Pennsylvania.
Fun.
Weird, right? So it's a very fossiliferous formation, and it is almost exclusively plants.
Wow.
Cool.
Yes.
That's why I haven't heard of it.
Right.
Exactly. So again, lots of lycopsids, lots of horsetails, lots of these classical ferns, and seed ferns. And you may have seen these fossils before. So they tend to be on these slabs that are very dark. So almost black, very fine grain with white compression fossils.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah.
Like, I think I might have one of those actually.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere.
Right, exactly. Like they're once I realized what it was, I was like, yes, absolutely. I have seen so many of these. They're very common. And then another example, this one was very fun. So I wanted to get out of the Carboniferous and out of the US. So this is an early Permian locality from Germany, and it's the Chemnitz Petrified Forest.
Ooh.
The part of Germany, it's like really close to Czechia. So you have these trunks of petrified tree ferns and horsetails, also seed ferns and conifers. But you have a lot of these horsetails. So Arthropodus is the genus. So these trunks were over 15 meters tall. So like 49, 50 feet tall. And they had these extensive underground rhizomes.
Ooh.
Which is really cool.
So this root system.
Yeah. So rhizomes are technically underground stems.
Okay.
Oh, right.
Great.
Right.
Yes. But basically, they function as roots for all intents and purposes. And it's really cool because I'm seeing all these pictures. Like, I want to go to Germany. They have all these pictures of, like, they excavated these trunks and they have them in a museum now. And they're just so massive. They're really, really cool. So the last category that I mentioned was famous fern events.
Yeah. Like fern, like parties.
Yep.
You could say that. One of these you could possibly call a party.
All right.
That's the second one. So
Tell us about these phenomena.
oh, that was really good.
I was going to say fern fiestas.
Sure. Yeah, that's good too.
The second one is a fern fiesta. This is kind of the opposite of a fern fiesta.
Okay.
So, hey.
Fern apocalypse.
Yes. Hey. Have you heard of the fern spike?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. So what's the fern spike?
The fern spike, I assume we're at the Permian extinction.
KPG is normally where it's most commonly associated.
Okay. So during this has come up in our mass extinction episodes, that
Yes.
sometimes during and shortly after mass extinction events, we will see, we've talked about fungal spikes,
Yes.
where you seem to see a high amount of fungi seemingly thriving in the post-apocalyptic world full of detritus.
Yes.
But you will also see, famously at the KPG, at the end of
Yes.
Cretaceous, increased abundance of fern fossils.
Yes.
Because ferns, I guess, also they're like super good at being opportunistic when all the other plants, they're like weeds. They'll pop up as soon as the opportunity is right.
Absolutely. So it's often not just necessarily fern fossils, but also spores.
Yes.
Gotcha.
You get this in abundance of spores.
Yeah, I think I've heard the term spores, like fern spore spike.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. And it is very famously associated with the KPG, but it is generally associated with mass extinctions. In fact, there is evidence that it occurred after the Mount St. Helens eruption.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
Yeah, so we have modern evidence for this as well. So basically, it's this like abundance of fern spores geologically instantly after a mass extinction event. So, but it's also associated with like the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. That's another one it's well known for.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for this is spores need less than seeds in order to get going. Because remember that alternation of generations, right? And some of these things, like the gametophyte, can wait 15 years just chilling. So the spores are wind dispersed. It didn't really talk about that, but they are wind dispersed. You don't really have pollinators with spores. And so that means that you don't need a pollinator. You don't need somebody. You don't need an animal around in order to disperse. If there's wind, and if you have, bare soil or something like that, a lot of the bigger things have been wiped out. The the gametophyte typically actually needs light. It needs to photosynthesize. So it actually does a little bit better. Like, oh, there's nobody in the way to shade me out. Ferns are part of early succession. They are some of these pioneers that are some of the first to go into these ecosystems. They're very disturbance tolerant. We see this in the fossil record. It is another indication of like, it's something that is commonly associated. It's kind of an indication like, oh, something happened there. And like I mentioned, like
the ferns were doing great. Something went wrong.
We're doing great. No one else is happy.
Allie from the future again. You may hear me call Azolla duckweed, but we already learned that these are different things.
But speaking of fern fiestas, are you familiar with the Azolla event?
I know the term. I don't know details.
Oh, I cannot wait to share this with you. Okay. So Azolla, what was that?
Zuko's sister.
Yeah. Blue fire.
Right. Just
mommy issues.
Yeah, severely traumatized.
Unacceptable. Duckweed was the answer I was looking for. That one I appreciate. Oh no. Okay, Azolla is duckweed.
I think you did say that earlier in the
I did. I said duckweed, and you were like, "Oh, I know what that is." And I said, "Azolla, we're going to talk about that again." This was the quiz, and you did not pass.
Will and I were more interested in being silly than we were in paying attention.
Hey, there's a first time for everything.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Okay, so Azolla is a duckweed. So if you are unfamiliar with duckweed, I will actually explain what it is now. They are teeny tiny little aquatic ferns. They are adorable. They could easily be distributed by ducks, right? They get the duck gets it out of its feet, it flies to another pond. There you go. Now we have duckweed here. They are freshwater. So Middle Eocene, so roughly 49 million years ago, the Arctic Ocean was almost entirely closed off from the other oceans. So it wasn't getting a lot of mixing, right? So it was very stratified. So it's debated whether or not there was actually fresh water in this stratification, or if maybe fresh water would periodically be brought in from rivers. But over the span of roughly 800,000 years, Azolla, this duckweed, lived up there. Lived and died and sank to the seafloor, which had the effect of drawing down CO2 levels, effectively ending the PETM.
Oh.
So, PETM, episode 103, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
The warmest time in
Yes.
the last 70 million years or so.
Yes. So effectively ending the PETM and ramping up our current ice house Earth. So there are sediment cores that have evidence of 8 meters or more, possibly up to 20 meters of cores that have these laminations, so these layers alternating between like normal background sedimentation and these layers of fossilized Azolla.
Huh.
Cool.
In the ocean.
Yes.
These are ocean deposits.
Yes. So again, like we know there's stratification. We
Right,
don't
right.
know if like there is possibly a lens of fresh water on the top or if these are being periodically brought in. But like I'm going to say some numbers that sound made up because they are so extreme. So at the beginning of the Eocene, right? Like during the PETM, the paleo CO2 levels were 3,500 parts per million.
Mhm.
By the middle Eocene, like when this is happening, it is down to 650 parts per million.
Wow.
Right? Like this is substantial.
Yeah.
Right? This is literally world changing. So Azolla is sometimes referred to as a superplant.
Mm-hmm.
So it can draw down a ton of nitrogen per acre per year.
Wow.
It is so good at this. And there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind, right? So we know that there is stratification because like you're not getting this mixing. So whether like I keep saying, unclear if the Azolla is living there or if it is being washed in. Regardless, it's not coming from super far. It can't withstand freezing today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was in the Arctic Sea.
Yeah.
But this stratification meant that you had anoxic bottom waters,
Yes.
right? So you had no oxygen, or functionally no oxygen to these bottom waters. And this is really important because you need to lock up that carbon in order for this to work, right? So it gets absorbed, by the plant, and the plant dies, it drops into these anoxic bottom waters. And so it's locked in and, drawn away. It is no longer interacting with the atmosphere and is basically locking it up. One of the cool things about this, so like people in my real life forget I'm a geologist because I talk about plants, but I'm about to drop some geology in this. So one of the really cool things about this is not too long after we stop seeing these laminations with the Azolla, we begin to see drop stones in the Arctic sediments.
Gotcha.
So for those of you who don't know, drop stones are evidence of glaciers.
Yes. These are big rocks that are carried by ice, and then when it melts, they drop it down to the floor.
Exactly. So it is the ocean equivalent of a glacial erratic.
Yeah.
I love drop stones. I love glacial erratics. I'm a big fan of glaciers in general. Mm-hmm. But this is really cool because that means that not long after the Azolla event, where you had duckweed that cannot withstand freezing in the Arctic Ocean or Arctic Sea, not long after that, there are glaciers up there.
Yeah. They heralded the Ice Age.
Exactly.
Wow.
It is this is amazing because like a lot of the time when we're talking about the ways that plants change the world, it was actually somebody else. Like secretly it was fungi or it was algae.
Right. Or
but this time, yeah, exactly. This time it was plants.
Very cool.
That's so cool.
And obviously there's other things going on, but like this was substantial.
Well, and it, like you said, that's a tiny, tiny plant, but kind of like algae. But this can cover a lake.
Yes.
Like this can cover the entire surface of a body of water. So that's a lot of surface area now.
Yes. Just amazing.
Cool.
Why?
This is the kind of thing that paleobotanists nerd out about.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, here's so one other question that seems important that we haven't brought up yet is where ferns started.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have? Is there enough evidence within this incredible fossil record to give us an idea of the origin of ferns and then where they went from there?
I can tell you a when more than I can tell you a physically where.
Okay.
Like, especially considering that during a lot of this time, we had a supercontinent, so it's kind of a moot point.
Yes.
Earth. Yeah, that's exactly where they came from. So the fossil record for ferns and friends, goes back to roughly the Middle Devonian, so 393 million years ago. A long time. The estimated divergence of the group goes back even further, so roughly 430 million years ago.
Okay.
So this is a very ancient group of plants.
Yeah, this is around the time that plants are coming out of the water.
Yes.
That
Right.
Land plant. These are some of the first land plants.
Right. So plants didn't take very long to get, I apologize for what I'm about to say, bryophytes. Interesting. I much prefer vascular plants. I'm so sorry.
Sure. Put in your request now for an episode about bryophytes.
I would love to talk about bryophytes and have my mind changed. Anyway, so yeah, it didn't really take very long from when plants got on land to when we have ferns. I mean, geologically speaking, right?
I mean, you gotta think plants just must have gone crazy with it. Like, oh my gosh, the water's out of the way.
Yes.
Right.
The sun is great unfiltered.
Right. Well, once you have that innovation of tubes, right? Like once you vascularize, like the world is your pistachio and you can go nuts. I am no
Yes.
longer saying the world is your oyster. It is now the world is your pistachio.
The sky is literally the limit.
Yes.
Yes, literally, right?
And we're gonna reach it.
Yes, exactly. And so ferns really got to take over, right? Like ferns are doing great in the Paleozoic. Like that is their time to shine. However, the end of the Carboniferous was not good to ferns. Like Carboniferous, excellent. End of Carboniferous, not so excellent.
Episode 95.
Yes. So the end Carboniferous was just generally not good to pteridophytes. Most of the leptosporangiate ferns, right?
The not weird ones.
The not weird ferns, your classical ferns, most of those went extinct.
Woo.
Right. Like substantial. At least one lineage survived because we got those today. And it diversified in the late Permian. So like throughout much of the Permian, not like the Permian is not a great time to be a plant or really an animal. It's just not really a great time to be on Earth. Well, on land at least. Anyway, so at the end, in the late Permian, we have this diversification of the ferns.
Just in time for the world to end again.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But most of those groups are still around.
Okay.
Nice.
Right. So like the ones that made it into the Permian, most of those groups are actually still around today. So like that group, most of that actually diversified in the Cretaceous.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yes.
I say interesting because number one, that's a long time after the Permian.
Yes.
But number two, because the Cretaceous is a time that flowering plants are diversifying.
Yeah.
Yes.
And had I been asked to guess, I would have guessed that ferns lost a lot of diversity around that time.
No. So weirdly, angiosperms helped ferns. Like, they have a very good relationship. So, as I mentioned in the conifers episode, like talking about gymnosperms, angiosperms pushed out gymnosperms to these extreme environments, these like margins, and that angiosperms can't really handle, but gymnosperms can handle anything. So they're doing fine. But there's not as much overlap in terms of like niche for ferns and angiosperms, because even tree ferns aren't really trees.
Right.
So they're not competing. Gymnosperms are also trees. Like, they are trying to be the same thing as angiosperms. And the advent, the spread of angiosperms, this radiation, especially in the Paleocene, when we get proper rainforests, that opened up a whole new world for ferns.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yes. Because when I was rattling off where things were from, there are a lot of ferns in the tropics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are in these tropical rainforests. So like Costa Rica has Costa Rica has an absurd diversity of ferns. Like, it is a very small area with a whole lot of ferns, because a lot of them are epiphytic, right? They can live on top of these trees.
That's what I was about to ask.
Like parasites.
Yes, exactly.
They're diversifying because their
Yes.
hosts are diversifying.
They are using the buddy system.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
living on
They're
top of them. They're not
This is
stealing.
Master Blaster, not
helping
not a growth.
each
Yes.
other out.
Yes, exactly.
So I get, is it fair to say that ferns and angiosperms don't really compete directly with each other very much, but angiosperms and gymnosperms do, and gymnosperms and ferns do a bit?
I don't know how much gymnosperms and ferns do.
Okay. So it's more, I guess, about ferns thrive in an angiosperm dominated
Yes.
ecosystem. Not so much
Yeah.
that it's like the gymnosperms are out of the way and the ferns can move in. Because
correct.
the space was once filled by gymnosperms is now filled by angiosperms.
Yes.
But the ferns like the angiosperms.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So the ferns
Yes.
are the little buddies standing there going, "Yeah, get them."
That's right. Yes, exactly.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so they actually diversified again in the Cretaceous, and like later on with the spread of these rainforests. So like that's where we get a lot of our modern diversity, is we have these tropical environments that, you know, ferns haven't had it this good since the Carboniferous.
Yeah.
Since it was mostly just ferns.
Right. It's like, oh, rainforest again. I love this.
Man, poor gymnosperms.
Right?
I feel so like
They really got the short end of the stalk.
yeah. I felt bad. I felt really bad for the gymnosperms when we did the gymnosperm episode. I think I feel worse now.
Yeah.
Again, episode 155. Go dedicate some of your attention to gymnosperms.
Pour one out for the gymnosperms.
Don't listen to episode 57. That's angiosperms. They get enough attention.
They're fine. But it is really interesting. So like thinking about all of these ancient groups and the diversity that we saw, most of the ferns, like the diversity of ferns and pteridophytes, is extinct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? So like a lot of these groups, even if they look very similar to things that are around today, like a lot of these groups are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even the ones that are around today, right? Like, you know, even the things that are conferable to modern groups, they don't always look the same. A lot of times they do. Sometimes you're like, that's a fern. They're often so much larger.
Yeah. Yep.
Just the orders of magnitude larger in the past. And other like morphological differences, like Calamites is leafier than Equisetum.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them, you know, a lot of superficially though, there are a lot of these similarities. It's a good shape, right? You know, they're recognizable, they're conferable, but they are undergoing a lot of changes. And like I said, most of them are gone.
Yeah, it really speaks to a lot of the discussion about the evolutionary history of ferns seems to underline this point that ferns are extremely adaptable and extremely survivable.
Yes.
They thrive first after a mass extinction or a
Yes.
local, eruption or something. And these are plants that are able to thrive in an angiosperm dominated world.
Yeah.
Yes.
That other plants are the top dogwoods. There you go.
Yeah.
Other plants are ruling the planet as plants go, and ferns are still doing extremely well.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
tough plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. They really, really are.
Cool.
Allie, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
You've mentioned this a couple times, and it came up during when I was looking things up ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
What are seed ferns?
Because, and to prove we were paying attention, ferns don't have seeds.
Ferns don't have seeds.
We were told this at the beginning
and
of
we're
the episode.
and we're fern experts. Now,
seeds aren't spores.
That it. You know what?
that's right.
You know
Makes you
what?
think.
Yeah.
This almost makes up for the Azola shenanigans. Partial credit. Woo! Okay. So seed ferns, oh my goodness. Okay. The seed ferns are frustrating. Let me put it that way. Because when you're looking up like carboniferous diversity, secretly everything's a seed fern.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get the impression with seed fern. Well, like you said, there were a bunch of things that were once considered fern allies.
Yes.
Yes.
And then as science got better, as
Yes.
we examined them, we went, oh, okay.
Yep.
Some of these are actual ferns and some of these are actually not
Yes.
in that group. Seed fern sounds like a group that were considered to be a thing. And then later paleontologists went, none of these are that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about plants is that they're modular.
I've heard that.
I have said it maybe once. So if you just see the fronds of a seed fern, you're like, yes, fern. But then you'll find a frond attached to a seed and you go, but seed.
Mhm.
Seed fern. So basically it is a polyphyletic group.
Mm-hmm.
So many different groups that we accidentally thought
Yep.
were all one group.
We know that they're not all the same group, but we don't know what group it is. So this is what we're using
So
for now.
They're
Right.
going to play together for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. Of extinct seed-producing plants that have ferny fronds. Basically, they're not ferns, but they're not angiosperms or gymnosperms.
Yeah. It's everything. Well, much like how you described that ferns are in that in-between.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
they're vascular plants, but they don't have seeds. They're in that
Yes.
Venn diagram.
Yes.
It sounds like seed ferns are the next little Venn diagram overlap
Yep.
between ferns and actual seed plants.
Yes. Yes,
Gotcha.
exactly. But we don't really know what they are. And people keep trying to add more things and make it an even less meaningful group. It's great.
Yay.
So they are found from the Devonian to the Cretaceous, question mark.
Okay.
One group may have persisted to the early Eocene in Tasmania.
Okay.
All right. Sure.
Possibly. They were very prominent, as I had mentioned, in the Carboniferous and the Permian. They were originally thought to be a transitional form between ferns and cycads.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, like, that makes... I see that logic. I follow it. It's not
Sure.
right, but I see
Cycads
it.
are gymnosperms, right?
Correct.
Got it. Great.
Correct. They are also the first group of seed plants that is known solely from the fossil record.
Oh.
Because the other two are modern,
Yeah, that's true.
which is substantial. Like that's actually a big deal.
That is cool.
I have this sentence and then I'm regretting it now because I realized that y'all aren't paleobotanists.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say this and you're going to humor me, okay?
Yes.
The most famous group is probably the Medulosins.
Humor.
Yeah.
Yes,
Medulosins.
obviously the most
That's what I would've
Medulosins.
said.
Yeah,
I-
absolutely.
Snakes. They got snakes
Mhm.
on the top of them.
Not Medusa. So
Petrifying.
Medulosins are a type of seed fern. They're very common. this episode, more than any other, I realized that y'all are not paleobotanists and we have not taken the same classes. So if you ever took a paleobotany class,
Never.
that's what I thought. And if you ever did like acetate peels of coal balls, which you might have done. Wait, I thought you did things with coal balls in undergrad, David.
No, I haven't. I haven't done any coal ball stuff.
I've groomed.
I'm so sorry.
I'm
Cool.
devastated. Anyway,
I played a kobold.
Oh yeah.
that's
yeah.
that.
Same.
I'm so upset.
This is all. See, in a plants episode, Will and I don't know anything. So we don't have anything of value to contribute for most of the episode. So it's just extremely stupid jokes.
I also feel like this in particular, y'all with love have had the least to contribute.
Yeah,
because you
we're
know
a
the
bit-
least about ferns.
Yes, that is absolutely.
I think I deserve points for not singing Down in Tasmania when you said that was the only place they might have lasted past the Cretaceous. I think I deserve.
Yes, a gold star. There you go. There you go, Will.
I heard you not do it, and I appreciated it.
Anyway, medulosins,
Sure.
if you've ever done an acetate peel of a coal ball, these are very, probably one of the most common groups of seed ferns you'll find. And that's all I'm going to say about seed ferns.
That's all I got to say about that.
Allie and I had a discussion ahead of this episode, which was basically, do we talk about seed ferns in the ferns episode? And I looked up a little bit and I said, it sounds like no. It sounds like we don't do that. And
We don't talk about seed ferns.
We don't talk about seed ferns. And Allie said that was a correct choice.
Yes, open the gate a little bit.
So send in your requests now for an episode about seed ferns.
Yes.
That'll be a different thing.
We are acknowledging the existence of seed ferns, and that is all.
We see seed ferns, we see you.
Yes.
But that's it. We're not.
That's it.
Allie,
Yes.
thank you so much for explaining everything about ferns to us.
Do now you feel like you are an expert on ferns?
Yes.
Ask me again in 6 months.
I realize you don't remember anything I taught you about leaves, so I'm not optimistic.
I remember a little bit. I learned that leaves have a top and a bottom.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That was an important revelation in that episode.
No.
I don't remember anything about orchids. That's
Tiny seeds.
As I revealed, they did have tiny seeds. That's
Tiny
true.
seeds.
Yes.
As I revealed in the bonus episode for Leave It to Us,
They-
before we
Yes.
leave, go check it out. It's on our feed now.
Vanilla ice cream, they're speckles.
Yes.
Right. That's it. There you go.
Should there be a section of Alley episodes that is a quiz about the last Alley episode? A pop quiz?
No.
Oh.
Allie,
Tempted.
this discussion has been fantastic. Before we wrap up the episode, there's one thing left to do, and it is our patron question. Every episode, we answer some questions that our patrons submitted to us on Patreon, which is one of the bonuses that you could get for supporting us on Patreon. This episode, we have questions about plants. 2 different patrons asked questions that are very similar. These are about grasses and grasslands.
They are friends.
Allie, Peter asks, what was the ground like before grasses took over? Was there a covering of some forms of plants, or was it mostly bare earth? And Justin asks, on a similar note, how did the evolution of grasslands affect the overall biomass of land animals? Were there pre-grass biomes of plants that could feed herds in the range of 1 million wildebeest or bison-sized animals like we see today? So both of these are sort of hitting on a similar question of what was there anything grass or grassland like before grass actually showed up? So I'm so sorry. I'll let you answer this question. The last thing that I'll note here, for any of our listeners who haven't heard us talk about grasses and stuff before, grasses evolved in like the Cretaceous period, and grasslands weren't really a thing until like 30, 40 million years ago. So this is a fairly recent thing in the history of the Earth.
We did an episode about this.
We did. Episode 38 was about grass.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So, correct. Those things are true. There has been grasses of some kind since the Cretaceous, but they did not become widespread until 30, 40 million years ago. 100% correct. Okay. But before the good job, David.
I made an inaudible gesture
Yes,
at Will.
and I acknowledged it on this audio format. So, because we live in a world with grasslands, and because we live in a society where grass lawns are a normal thing we see, like parks and whatever are all grass, we as people kind of emphasize the importance of grass in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So before there was grasslands, there were plenty of things that could be ground cover in that way. And even today, like there are plenty of plants that are not grass that are ground cover, right? Like plenty of weeds
Yes.
Yep.
are not grass.
Yep. That's exactly what I was about to say.
Wildflowers are not grass.
Would you say that some of the ground cover plants are ferns?
Yes.
Great, nailed it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Don't
That's
worry.
why I picked those Patron questions.
You thematically excellent. So like lots of wildflowers. There are, yes, mosses and ferns and just shrubby vascular plants, right? So not quite trees, but not trees. They're trying.
Mm-hmm.
But this includes things like cycads. And cycads are important when we start talking about historically, before grasslands, what was there to eat? So today, right, we have the million wildebeest and these bison, but we had dinosaurs before we had grasslands.
Yeah.
And they ate
Right?
a lot.
They ate a lot. And it wasn't like, I am one rather large. No. There were many of them on the landscape. And they didn't have grass. And they didn't really have angiosperms.
Mm-hmm.
So angiosperms are incredibly nutritionally dense. Like you don't have to eat as much volume of angiosperms in order to get the nutrition. So we know that they were eating dinosaurs were eating things like horsetails and cycads and Bennettitalians and probably ginkgos too. So throughout time, there have been, even before grasses, before angiosperms, there were plenty of plants for these large animals to eat. So we've definitely seen differences in biomass, but grasses weren't necessarily this revolution and suddenly we can support more things, because we were doing that in the Cretaceous too.
Yeah.
Well, and the point you made about like wildflowers
Yes.
and all of those other weed-esque and things that you so often are tried to be kept out of the grass lawns.
Yeah.
You can be in a field where those are, if not the majority, a major percentage of the plants in that field.
Yes.
And it doesn't look like at a glance, it just looks like a really overgrown grassy field.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There are ways to have open environments that aren't grass.
Yes.
And we have had open environments throughout time. Like this is something I have really had to push against in my research in East Africa, because there's this obsession, like people don't want to let go this mythology that before grasslands, there was this pan-African forest and everything was closed forest.
Yep.
It's like, no, we've had a mosaic of open and closed environments across the world basically as long as we have had terrestrial environments. Once we got trees and could have a closed environment, like we've had a mosaic on the planet.
Well, because like even if it's like scrublands where it's like shrubby sized things.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
That's what I was about to ask, is because it sounds like even if we accept that the mythology that grasslands came in and replaced forests and bare earth,
right,
there is still this mythology that grasslands came in and took over all of the open space.
Yeah.
right.
And what angiosperms and grass relatives and stuff are, I mean, you can't go to any field on the planet and not find some angiosperm and probably some grass thing.
Yes.
There are still those shrubby plants and other weed-like plants that occupy those environments.
Yes, absolutely. So I gotta say, grass has some great PR.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
they're doing, it's like grass and cranberries.
Yeah.
Like they're the two. They got the greatest marketing teams.
Well, and it's that, and we've talked about this just in general when like discussing ancient ecosystems, that the exact players within an open environment that dinosaurs would have been living in
Mhm.
would have been different plants. It would
Yes.
not have included grasses before they evolved, and even
Yeah.
after, not as the major player.
Right.
Mhm.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that the overall shape of
Yes.
that ecosystem would have been that different.
Yes.
That you still have had big herbivores walking around low plants and
Yes.
grazing and browsing on these low-lying plants.
Yeah. I was actually about to ask on a very related note. So when I was a child and I would draw a picture of
Mhm.
dinosaurs out on a field and I would cover the ground in just like wavy green
Mhm.
lines to represent the grass.
Yeah.
And then later I looked back at that and I was like, that's not right. There was no grass in the time of the dinosaurs. Would you say that that looks pretty much how ground cover would have looked? Or do you think it would, like, if we were dropped in a herd of triceratops in a field, would we go, no, this isn't grass?
Okay, here's how I would describe it.
Great.
All right. If you were outside and you were wearing your glasses and you were like, yes, bison and grass. And then you took off your glasses, you're like, big brown lump and green bits on the bottom. That's basically the level of similarity we're talking.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. No, that works. So my like little crayon drawings
Yeah.
as a child, probably still pretty good.
Just healed a little part of your inner child.
Right, exactly. If we pretend that we're looking at like horsetails or something, some lycophytes, like, you know what? That's probably fine.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, great.
Neat.
Peter and Justin, thank you for asking those very thought-provoking questions. Really appreciate it. Listeners, go check out the blog post that is associated with this episode on our website if you're interested in getting some links and also seeing some pictures about these wacky plants that we've been talking about. I'll have to ask Allie to send me some pictures of wacky plants.
Oh, man. You should really look at the blog post because you should really look at the pictures because this is an audio format and you need to see these friends. You need to see these weirdos.
Yeah. Plants are always tough in an audio format because there's so much visual.
And if you don't already know who they are, my description of it's basically twigs with miniature tennis balls. When you see a whisk fern, you're going to realize that that's a great description.
Check out the blog post. Check out the other stuff that we've got going on. We recently released 2 double pilot episodes for Leave It to Us. If you enjoy hearing Allie talk about plants, there's more where that came from, and there's more coming up in the future. Also, it's April, so Silver Screen Science is going on, so check out our Silver Screen Science episodes. A big thanks to everybody who requested this episode topic. A big thanks to our new patrons and our old patrons. A big thanks to anybody who listens to our podcast. And an extra special, super big thanks to our top tier patrons on Patreon, Sarah May, Danielle the Bug Lover, and Jeff Ellington. We release episodes every fortnight. There will be more episodes coming up in the future, and in 10 episodes from now, we'll have Allie back on to talk about some other stuff.
Who knows what? It'll be great.
Allie, this has been an absolute delight. I think that the only thing keeping this episode from being the most wacky and off the rails episode that we've done is that 4 episodes ago, we had Astrid Lundberg on to talk about Edward Drinker Cope. And that's hard to beat.
Yep.
That's true. I would also argue that my reaction to the existence of lichens.
That's true.
I will never get over lichens.
This is a question I meant to ask, and I totally forgot to ask it. Is Glossopteris one of these ancient fern things?
So, you're breaking my heart. So that's one of the things that sometimes gets lumped into seed ferns, but like just complicates the whole thing if you put it in there.
Well, forget I asked.
Great question. I'm sorry you asked.
Amazing. Anyway, that's the end of the episode.
Next episode will not be a tiny weird version of our episode. We do not alternate our generations.
No, it'll be a normal, regular sized,
a little creepy subterranean episode.
I think when you think about it, our comments earlier, Azola would be a waterbender.
Yeah.
So it couldn't be Yeah, we were mistaken. That
Yeah,
wouldn't be-
obviously.
I
Swamp
don't.
Bender.
I don't imagine. Yeah,
Swamp
it's- I don't imagine that duckweed would do well with fire.
No.
Then again, neither did Azula.
Yeah.
That didn't work out well for her.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.